Chapter 1050. The people of Siam were very proud. They felt superior when they saw other people. They had never suffered such humiliation before. Therefore, many people came to the diplomatic mission compound in the morning. They wanted to prove that the rumors were false. They wanted to prove that their country was still strong and dignified. However, when the prisoner carriage came out of the compound, all their hopes were dashed. They saw a man in heavy armor standing in the carriage and parading through the streets. On his neck were the words "Guilty General Tong Si," written in Siamese. This was a blatant slap in the face. All the Siamese who saw this scene clenched their fists tightly to express their unwillingness to accept this. They felt humiliated by their country's humiliation. At this moment, their patriotism began to crumble. Some people could not help but curse. Ma Dali, who was accompanying them, wanted this effect. He glanced at Chun Hong and saw that his expression was ugly. He sneered in his heart. This is just the beginning. There will be more exciting things later. Chun Hong did not know what Ma Dali was thinking. He only hoped that the convoy would leave the city as soon as possible. Then, he would bring Ma Dali back to the diplomatic compound to discuss the details of the peace talks. He was even thinking about how to appease the people, how to restore the prestige of the country, and how to unite the people. Suddenly, a loud shout broke his train of thought. A man in a servant's uniform suddenly broke through the guards and rushed to the prison wagon, shouting for his master. The Siamese soldiers in charge of guarding the carriage did not have time to react. Then, something unexpected happened. The servant cried out loud, then looked at the prisoner and said, "No. You are not our general. You are not General Tong Si." The first sentence was not very clear, but the second sentence explained everything clearly. Tong Si was a fake. Stop him. Chun Hong, who had a guilty conscience, widened his eyes and cursed in his heart. He hoped that nothing would happen, but something still happened. Ma Dali, who had been waiting for this moment, asked with a dark expression, "What's going on? General Chun, shouldn't you give us an explanation?" Facing Ma Dali's questioning gaze, Ha Chun Wang naturally had to deny it. He immediately said in a very firm tone, "It must be a misunderstanding, it must be a misunderstanding. How about this, leave it to me." Chun Hong had to do something. Otherwise, things would really be messed up. If that really happened, the king might even kill him. After making a promise, Chun Hong rode out from the group and came to the prisoner's carriage. He first yelled at the servant and ordered him to be taken away. At the same time, he said to the surrounding people who were watching the show, "This is General Tong. He attacked our good friend, the 5-star army without permission. He was punished according to the law. All right, the matter has been clarified. Everyone, don't crowd around here. Go do whatever you need to do." Previously, the rumors that Tong Si had been convicted were all hearsay. Although he was now in the prison van, it was still a mystery as to why he had been arrested. Now that Chun Hong had taken the initiative to explain himself, this was equivalent to an official response. Immediately, the surrounding commoners were unhappy. Tong was the person who had once killed the leader of the 5-star army. At that time, this incident was widely publicized in the royal city. Now that he had lost the battle, he was thrown out as a scapegoat to express goodwill to his former enemy. This kind of government, this kind of country, was really disappointing. But didn't General Tong Si attack under the king's order? Yes, otherwise, how could a general take away hundreds of thousands of troops without a decree? This doesn't make sense. Yes, we need a reasonable explanation. General Tong Si is innocent. We shouldn't bow down to the 5-star army. Siam is the most powerful country in the world. All kinds of shouts were different, but the meaning was very similar. It could be seen that the people were still very emotional. There were also some patriots among them. This was the foundation of Siam when it was a big city. With such outstanding people, as long as they didn't do anything that angered the heavens, what couldn't they do? Unfortunately, his good hand was ruined by Chun Hong and the others. If Hamad still had the final say, this wouldn't have happened. This was the role of a person in a powerful country. Otherwise, how could a sheep leading a herd of lions defeat a herd of sheep led by a lion? All right, this is an order. If anyone dares to question it, they will be arrested and severely punished. Chun Hong, who didn't want to complicate matters, was angry and showed a fierce expression. This fierce expression naturally had an effect on the ordinary people. Immediately, many people shut their mouths. Anyone could see that if they said anything inappropriate at this time, there was a possibility of them being arrested. That would be too unfair. But not everyone was afraid of Chun Hong. For example, Ma Dali, who was prepared, saw that the voices of the people were about to be suppressed and knew that it was time for him to stand up. He sneered in his heart and rode forward. "General Chun, I have a question. Please bring that servant over. I have something to ask." Seeing that it was Ma Dali, Chun Hong immediately smiled and said, "Minister Ma, you don't have to worry about such a small matter. I can handle it." "It's not a problem of whether you can handle it or not. I know that you intend to protect General Tong Si. In such a mood, perhaps you can really get a fake person to fool us. Therefore, we have to verify the person's identity. Otherwise, we will become the joke of the five-star army," Ma Dali said seriously. The five-star army was now waiting for Tong Si's arrival, and time was limited. If Chun Hong couldn't convince Ma Dali, he couldn't be sent to the five-star army. The war had to continue, and Chun Hong couldn't bear such a big responsibility. Helplessly, he waved his hand and asked the servant who was about to be brought back. When the servant was brought back, he looked at Ma Dali in horror. Then Ma Dali said, "What did you say just now? You said that this isn't General Tong Si, right?" "I might have seen wrongly." The servant seemed to know that he had made a big mistake. At this moment, his voice was trembling. "Don't be afraid. Just tell the truth. I can guarantee that if you tell the truth, no one will make things difficult for you. Not only that, I will also keep you by my side to protect your safety. How about it? Can you tell the truth this time?" Ma Dali made a promise in front of everyone. Ma Dali's intention to protect him was very sincere. At this moment, the servant seemed to have let go of all his worries. First, he raised his head and looked at the person on the prisoner's carriage. Then, he pointed at the person and said, "I'm General Tong's servant. Of course, I recognize our general. However, this person is really not our general." "Are you sure?" Ma Dali suddenly raised his voice. "I'm sure." The servant also said with a look of desperation. Perhaps he also knew that his life and safety had fallen into Ma Dali's hands. If he didn't tell the truth, only death would await him. He had no other choice. "Mph." Ma Dali's cold snort reached Chun Huang's ears. His face immediately turned ugly. "General Chun, I think I need an explanation. Explain your numbness." Chun Hong really wanted to say this, but he didn't dare. Right now, he was at Ma Dali's mercy. What could he say when he was at a disadvantage? Fortunately, his reaction was fast enough. He quickly raised the horsewhip in his hand and lashed out at a guard beside him. He shouted, "Speak! Who gave you the courage to give this general a fake to fool me and the noble envoy? Did you eat a bear's heart or a leopard's gall?" All right, the scapegoat had been randomly picked. The matter was resolved immediately. Ma Dali and the others returned to the diplomatic mission's courtyard. At the same time, the servant from Tong's residence also returned with them. Presumably, with this person around, Chun Hong couldn't find a random person to fool him. Chun Hong went to the palace with a constipated expression. He didn't know what to do now that he had messed up his mission. However, the expected thunderous rage didn't happen. Perhaps the king also knew that after locking Xianxia in the dungeon and torturing him, he had no choice but to continue using this general. Furthermore, he knew about this matter. There was no way that he was being lied to. Post a notice and put Tong on the wanted list. Search every place and person related to Xianxia. Reward him heavily. I don't believe that a living person can fly to the sky, right? Ili Chi had dug into a dead end and directly linked Tong Si's disappearance to Prime Minister Hammond. Reality proved that if the method wasn't correct, the results wouldn't be correct. 5 days passed quickly. Under Yang Chendong's premeditated plan, the army continued to advancing towards Bangkok. Along the way, the foreign soldiers who had been baptized in the battlefield went through fierce battles again and again. After 150,000 casualties, there were only 100,000 left. However, these 100,000 soldiers definitely had the combat strength of a B-grade army. Another 20,000 soldiers were sacrificed in exchange for the defeat of the Siamese East Army. Of the original 250,000 soldiers, apart from those who were killed or captured, 20,000 managed to escape back to Bangkok. Behind them was the main force of Yang Chendong's 5-star army, which consisted of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. The victory of the North Army was finally decided. Under the command of the Second Army Luo Pe, the public security chief Long Tainan, and the Lao general He Guang, they engaged in a huge battle with the Siamese army's General Godin. Chapter 1051. Gordon lived up to his name as a general of the Siam army. Not only was he brave, but he was also good at commanding. At one point, he brought a lot of pressure and threat to the 5-star army. However, just when both sides were evenly matched, 2nd Master Lu and 6th Master Lu, the two firearm engineers, made their move. The cannons opened up a path and the muskets attacked. Once again, they showed the world the difference between muskets and cold weapons. Faced with the sudden attack of the two elite Cold Vanguard Division, Gordon could do nothing but watch helplessly as they stabbed at him like two sharp knives. However, he didn't choose to run away like the other generals who were enemies of the 5-star army. Instead, he chose to sacrifice himself on the battlefield. He led his personal soldiers to charge at the Cold Vanguard Division. In the end, his blood was spilled on the battlefield, and he truly fulfilled the saying that generals should die on the battlefield. When the news of Prime Minister Hammond being imprisoned came, perhaps Gordon knew that he had no way out. If he lost the battle and returned to the capital, with the jealousy of Chun Hong, he might not have a good ending. He might even implicate his family. Since that was the case, he might as well die on the battlefield. At least he could preserve his reputation and protect his family. Gordon shed blood on the battlefield and died heroically for his country. Once the news spread, the North Army was in chaos. Without a commander, they could only retreat in the face of the 5-star army. Not long after, Chiang Mai and Dong Chi were conquered. In the end, only 50,000 of the 300,000 soldiers escaped back to Bangkok. While the East and North launched a fierce counterattack, the two divisions of the First Sea Army in the south re-surrounded the important city of Pattaya. With the help of artillery, they quickly breached the city. The second-ranked general of the Siamese army, Nayu, died in battle. The other second-ranked general, Mua, fled back to Bangkok with 10,000 soldiers. At this point, the capital was in an awkward situation of being surrounded on three sides. In Bangkok, 80,000 defeated soldiers gathered. In addition to the original 100,000 elites and 200,000 new recruits, there were close to 400,000 soldiers. Just in terms of numbers, they exceeded the 5-star army's 250,000 soldiers. The East Army had 125,000 soldiers, the North Army had close to 100,000, and the South Army had less than 20,000. The Siamese army only had a numerical advantage. In terms of morale, the Siamese army was a mess. Actually, when Chun Hong betrayed Tong Si and asked for peace with the 5-star army, the morale of the army and the people had already started to crumble. The pitiful king of Italy didn't think about how to salvage the situation. Instead, he offered a huge reward and made it so that everyone knew about it. This only accelerated the time and process of their defeat. If one's heart was broken, it would be useless no matter how much effort they put in. Siam, which was originally a powerful country, went from glory to destruction in just half a year. Siam's territory was too small, and there was limited space to maneuver. Another reason was that the 5-star army's strategy was correct. After discovering the strength of the opponent, Yang Chendong naturally changed his strategy. Using battle to nurture the army was undoubtedly the right move. Then he grabbed hold of the opponent's weakness and used a person who had been forgotten by the opponent to attack the opponent, thus causing the opponent to lose the morale of the army. Now, it seemed that it was also an excellent move. Of course, having a pig like Chun Hong as an opponent would also help things progress smoothly. Siam capital, Bangkok. The 8 gates that led to the outside world were all closed. The outer and inner city gates were filled with Siam soldiers. From afar, it was a patch of black. However, when one got closer, it was not hard to see the worry in their eyes. Siam had 800,000 regular soldiers and 200,000 reserve soldiers. However, in just over half a year, more than half of them had been killed or injured. There were only less than 400,000 soldiers left. One could imagine how they would feel if they were to go deep into the enemy's territory. Ha Chunwang was once again entrusted with a heavy responsibility. He became the great general of the city defense, and Mengwa, who had escaped from the south, became the deputy general of the city defense. The two of them commanded an army of 380,000, but there was not the slightest bit of joy on their faces. "General Meng, what do you think?" On top of the city wall, Ha Chunwang, who was dressed in heavy armor, looked down at the 5-star army. His eyes couldn't help but twitch. He had a feeling that if the other party really decided to attack the city, with those advanced cannons and guns, they wouldn't be able to stop them. Mengwa was a standard 7 feet tall man. He also had a certain level of talent in leading troops. Unfortunately, he was born at the wrong time. How could his sword be a match for cannons and guns? Now that he was asked by Ha Chunwang, he only hesitated for a moment before shaking his head. He spat out 3 words with difficulty: "We can't defend it." That's right, we can't defend it. Although there are 380,000 soldiers in the city, there are still 600,000 civilians. The daily expenditure is huge. Now that the people are in chaos, once the siege starts, no one knows what will happen. Since that is the case, why don't we negotiate while we still have the strength? He seemed to be talking to himself, but also seemed to be talking to Mengwa. In short, he was not prepared to continue fighting. He was prepared to negotiate, and he hoped that Mengwa would take the initiative to take on this task. Mengwa was a smart man. Apart from his own efforts, there was also a benefactor who appreciated him. That was the captured Prime Minister Hammond. Now that the benefactor was in trouble, it was already a miracle that he was not implicated. How could he still dare to bargain? This general is willing to cooperate with the great general's orders. How good. I didn't misjudge you. Then I'll leave the task of negotiating outside the city to you. Of course, I will also negotiate with the 5-star army's diplomatic group inside the city. Let's work together to turn the tide. What do you think? Seeing Meng was so sincere, Chun Hong was naturally happy. Amidst his happiness, the twitching of the corner of his eyes showed his killing intent. Mengwa was someone recommended by the Prime Minister. He would not put such a person in an important position. On the contrary, he would only find an opportunity to kill him. As long as the negotiation task was not completed, he would have a reason to act. Perhaps it was because of this that Mengwa was so tactful. Even though he knew that the chances of negotiating were slim, he still wanted to try. What happened next was a tragedy. Mengwa led a group of over 100 people out of Bangkok to the 5-star army's barracks and was successfully instigated to defect. The person who acted was Beta Persei, who had always been by Yang Chendong's side. According to the young master's plan, he first helped Mengwa analyze the situation, especially standing in Mengwa's position and talking about many things that might happen in the future. Then he promised that as long as Mengwa was willing to surrender, not only would he be able to become a general of Siam in the future, even his noble Prime Minister Hamad, who was locked in prison, would be able to become the deputy governor of Siam. Smart people naturally knew how to choose, and Beta Persei was so considerate of him. Mengwa, who was already at the end of his rope, had no other choice. Thus, after staying in the 5-star army's barracks for 5 days, he returned to Bangkok. He only said that the other party disliked his position and needed someone more powerful to negotiate, then he returned to his post. Mengwa actually came back alive, which was somewhat beyond Chun Huang's expectations. After knowing the 5-star army's attitude, he was completely terrified. In short, he did not have the courage to go to the 5-star army's barracks to negotiate. Previously, he had lied to them about Tong Si, so what could he say now? The 5-star army's siege was still ongoing, and it was only a real siege. They did not intend to attack. After the initial fear, Ha Chunwang became lively again. He made a public statement that although the 5-star army was strong, But facing the 400,000-strong army of Bangkok, they did not have the strength to deal with it. Therefore, there was no need for everyone to panic. As long as time passed, the surrounding countries and factions would definitely step in, and the matter would be resolved. When Huanwang's words spread out, it did indeed give the panicked hearts of the people in the city a dose of tranquilizer. Everyone was no longer so afraid. However, the streets began to become chaotic, especially the food in the grain stores, which doubled. There was no other way. No one knew how long this siege would last. Food was the most important thing to the people, so they had to prepare more food. This kind of behavior quickly made Bangkok fall into an extremely awkward situation. No one actually attacked the city, and it was chaotic internally. This really made people not know what to say. Yang Chendong did not have anything to say. His attention was now split between El Island in the south and Yunnan in the north. The siege of El Island had lasted for more than half a year. The so-called King of Dufay, Abu Bakr, had also been trapped in the capital for half a year. After a long siege, the internal chaos had become prominent. It was only a matter of time before they were captured. However, the changes in Yunnan in the north were somewhat unexpected. Under the pincer attack of Nanming and Shiping King, Zhu Huichen finally could not hold on. Then, he did something that many people did not expect. He actually contacted the Bangla Kingdom and asked them to send troops to help him attack Shiping King's troops. He also promised that all the captured territory and population would be handed over to the other party, and he would not receive any benefits. In order to survive, Zhu Huichen did not hesitate to betray the interests of his ancestors and even the dignity of the Han people. Such a good thing made the Bangla Kingdom tempted. As the saying goes, if you don't take advantage of benefits, you are a bastard. They really sent out a general, Rajiv, to lead 100,000 troops through the barren mountains and entered the strategic town behind Yunnan to launch a fierce attack. As soon as 100,000 Bangla people appeared, Shiping King Mu Bin was caught off guard. Without any preparation, he repeatedly lost Jiangtu City, Manmo City, and other strategic towns. After losing Mengding City, Mu Bin had no choice but to lead his troops to fight. Zhu Huichen took this opportunity to counterattack. Shiping King's army was defeated. They abandoned their base in Kunming City and fled to Kelisai. Then, letters of request for help were sent to Nanming and the Five-Star Army. Chapter 1052. After receiving the news, Yang Chendong looked at the contents of the telegram, his eyes filled with rage. This is seeking death. He admitted that the appearance of this little butterfly had changed many things, but there was one thing that had not changed, and that was the status of the Han people. Not only did it not fall, but it was also rising. Looking at the Han people under Yang Xie, which one of them did not live with dignity? Which one of them was not proud of their identity as Han people? It was to the point that who knew how many outstanding people from other races wanted to join this group. Regardless of Yang Chendong's attitude towards the Ming dynasty, there was no need to say anything about his attitude towards the Han people. He thought of ways to obtain benefits for them, raise their dignity and change their lives. Seeing that the results were getting better and better, as the descendant of old Zhu, Zhu Huiping had indeed led the wolf into the house. Just this alone, who knew how many Han people would have no home to return to, who knew how many Han people would have no food to eat, leading to death. Yang Chendong, who attached great importance to the Han people, very quickly gave the order to have the 7th Division, the Heavenly Strategy Division, who was left behind in Yunnan Province, immediately rush to Langshan and advance 100 li forward to receive all the Han people who had no home to return to due to the chaos of war. He also requested the provinces to take out a portion of the surplus food and send it to the 7th Division to ensure that none of the Han people who rushed over would have problems due to hunger. Under such a decision, who knew how much money and resources would be wasted, but Yang Chendong still did it without hesitation. The person living in this world had to have some goals, some perseverance, so what if he had to pay a price for it? Yang Chendong's words were orders, and they had to be completed without any hesitation. Immediately after the telegram was sent out, the provinces began to move. Telegram to Ma Dali, Menghua, and the relevant intelligence personnel hidden in the city. I will only give them 5 days. After 5 days, we will launch an attack on Bangkok. Yang Chendong did not want to wait any longer. Based on the current situation, the besieged Bangkok would collapse in at most half a year due to the lack of food. However, the unexpected appearance of the Bangladeshi soldiers had ruined his plan, and he could not continue to wait. Within Bangkok, Meng Huo was currently standing in the air in his own courtyard. It had been a few days since Meng Huo had returned to the city. Other than reporting the progress of the peace talks, he had been cooped up in the house and had not gone out. He knew very well that he was in the way of some people because he held military power. This time, it was obvious that they wanted to kill him with a borrowed knife and punish him for his crime. Fortunately, the 5-star army didn't want to make things difficult for him. After keeping him for no use, they let him go. Then he found an excuse to get away with it. However, this didn't mean that he was fine. On the contrary, if he didn't know how to restrain himself, he was afraid that there would be bigger problems coming for him. For this reason, he decided to give up his power and stay in seclusion. This way, some people should be able to let go. He had been busy all this while. Naturally, he was not used to stopping abruptly. However, what made Meng Huo even more dissatisfied was that the streets were too chaotic. Even if he stayed in the courtyard, he could still feel it. He heard from the servants that due to the city gates being sealed, the prices of goods were constantly rising. Some poor people could no longer afford to live, and there were even cases of robbery on the streets. This was why it was so chaotic. There are so many soldiers in the city. Don't they care? Hearing this answer, Meng Huo's face was full of disbelief. He couldn't understand. With nearly 400,000 Siamese soldiers in the city, how could they cause such chaos? Soldiers? Many of the robbers are actually soldiers in disguise, the servant said with a snort of contempt. Meng Huo's face immediately turned ugly. He almost forgot that soldiers were not treated well. It was a time of war. How many rich families were willing to send their children to join the army? In order to survive, they had no choice but to do so. When he thought about how even soldiers were robbing on the streets, Meng Huo could imagine how chaotic the city was. From this, he was even more certain that surrendering to the 5-star army was the right choice. At least, if they wanted to solve this chaos, only they could do it. His mentality had changed. When Yang Chendong's order was secretly sent to his residence by the CIA, Meng Huo decided to cooperate with him. This was also for the sake of fewer Siamese civilians. After all, he couldn't see any hope in the current Siamese government. Remember, the 5-star army will attack the South Gate tonight. When you hear the sound of cannons, it's time for you to take action. After the messenger reminded him, he walked out as a delivery man. Looking at the messenger's back, Meng Huo's heart was filled with emotions. Since the beginning of the war, Bangkok had been searching for dangerous people in the city. More than half a year had passed, and these people were still in the city. If it was just luck, it wouldn't be reasonable. The most likely explanation was that they had paid for everything. When did Siamese become so decadent? This made it even more impossible for people to see the existence of hope. When Meng Huo received the order, General Chun Hong also received an invitation from Ma Dali. Ma Dali wanted to invite him over for a meal to discuss the future. Although there were emissaries from the 5-star army who came with Meng Huo, Ma Dali was still the main force in the negotiations. Chun Hong didn't dare to neglect his request. He immediately brought 30 soldiers and rushed to the diplomatic compound. In his opinion, Bangkok was still the capital of Siamese. It was still his territory. No one would dare to make a move on him. However, he soon realized that he was wrong. What he didn't expect was that Ma Dali had a platoon of guards by his side. It was only because they were well protected that no one was able to see through them. This platoon could play a role in turning the situation around at a critical moment. The sun set and the moon rose. A day of darkness was about to arrive. Meng Huo donned the armor of a general and summoned 50 soldiers in his residence. He was ready for action. Boom! As the night fell, the sound of cannons came as expected. This was the first time that the 5-star army had fired the cannons since they besieged the city. It scared the unprepared soldiers and civilians in the city. For a moment, the streets were filled with shouts. Fortunately, there was a curfew in Bangkok. Otherwise, he couldn't imagine what would happen if so many people were running around on the streets. The cannons finally sounded. Meng Wu led 50 soldiers out of his residence and headed straight for the dungeon. The first thing he wanted to do was to rescue Prime Minister Hamad. This was also the condition of surrender that Meng Wu had proposed. Yang Chendong had readily agreed to it. Meng Wu led his soldiers out of the residence. This news was quickly discovered by the Siamese spies in charge of keeping an eye on the area. The news was then spread. General Meng Wu was naturally unaware of all this. Now that he had decided to take action, he couldn't care less. With his identity as the deputy general guarding the royal capital, Meng Wu entered the dungeon without much effort. He saw Prime Minister Hamad locked up in the innermost cell. At this moment, Hamad didn't have the slightest demeanor of a prime minister. His hair was disheveled and his body reeked of a foul stench. He wasn't much better than a beggar on the streets. However, his eyes were still very bright. When he saw Meng Wu leading a group of soldiers in front of him and breaking the lock on the cell, he sighed and said, "Sigh, why bother? Prime Minister, it's not that I didn't do it because I knew the law. You have been wronged. Tong Si's matter was clearly done by a despicable person. The king was also worried that your achievements would shock the emperor. That's why he took the blame." Meng Wu said with tears in his eyes. "But you..." Hamad seemed to want to say something, but he quickly shook his head and asked, "Tell me, what's the situation outside?" "Prime Minister, the 5-star army has already surrounded the royal capital. The royal capital could be breached at any moment. Due to the jealousy of Chen Hong, I was sent to negotiate with the 5-star army a few days ago. I almost lost my life and surrendered to them." When he said the last sentence, Meng Wu lowered his head. After all, no matter the reason, surrendering to the enemy wasn't something to be proud of. He was really afraid that Prime Minister would reprimand him. Hearing that a general was sent to negotiate, an indescribable anger flashed across Hamad's face. He then sighed and said, "Forget it. If that's the case, I'm afraid that the fate of Siam will come to an end. No one can reverse it. Prime Minister, the 5-star army has already agreed. After breaching the royal capital, you will be the deputy governor here. I will be the general here. As long as we care for the people of Siam, we can still do many things for them." Without the storm that he imagined, Meng Wu raised his head and said with a hopeful expression, "Ha." Before Prime Minister could reply, a burst of laughter sounded behind him. A group of 200 people suddenly appeared. The one at the front was a dark-skinned man. After he laughed, he said, "You really betrayed Siam. If that's the case, then prepare to die." "Captain Lick?" Meng Wu turned his head. When he saw who it was, his face was filled with shock. Lick was the captain of Ha Chuanwang's guards and was deeply trusted. Although his rank was slightly low, in Siam where Gordon and the other generals died, he was already considered a famous general. Since he appeared here, needless to say, it must be Hamad's order. With the appearance of Lick, a battle to the death was unavoidable. Looking at the 50 personal guards who had come with him and then seeing that there were 200 opponents, Meng Wu only hesitated for a moment before he drew his sword. He looked at the other party and said, "Since that's the case, there's no point in saying anything more. Let me see your skills." Kill! More than 200 people began to fight each other. The clashing sounds of swords and sabers rang out incessantly as they fought in the small dungeon. The soldiers that followed Meng Wu were not only loyal, they were also more skilled than normal soldiers. If it was on the battlefield, it wouldn't be difficult for 50 of them to fight 200 people. However, Lick was not to be trifled with. The 200 people that he brought this time were also veterans of the battlefield. They had the ability to fight 1 against 2. Although they were weaker than the soldiers on the other side, they had the advantage in numbers. When it came to a fight, their advantage was very obvious. Chapter 1053. With 4 against 1, it didn't take long for over 20 of Meng Wu's personal guards to die. Moreover, they were constantly forced to retreat. If this continued, they probably wouldn't be able to save Xianxia, and Meng Wu would also die here. However, all of this changed with the sound of arrows being shot. A group of about 50 men in black suddenly charged out. They were all dressed in black and had black masks covering their faces. They held small crossbows in their hands. With just one wave of attack, they killed dozens of Siamese soldiers and opened up a bloody path for the Siamese soldiers. Using this opportunity, Meng Wu led the remaining soldiers out and met up with the men in black. It was also at this moment that Meng Wu saw clearly that the leader of the black-clothed group was actually a woman. Although he couldn't see her face clearly due to the black cloth covering her face, he could still make an accurate judgment based on her figure and voice. General Meng Wu, we are here on the orders of the 6th young master to receive you. Leave this place to us. Go to the east gate first and open the gate. Right, this is for you. It will help you. The woman in the lead was the person in charge of Bangkok, Xianxia. As she spoke, she placed a sword in Meng Wu's hand. This is Chun Huang's sword? Meng Wu was shocked when he saw the sword in his hand. That's right. Chun Huang has been placed under house arrest by us. You are now the highest-ranking officer in the army. Go do what you should do. Xianxia nodded and then gave the order to the dozens of men in black behind her to kill the enemy. These were all brothers of the CIA's operations team. Before joining, they had all received secret training. In terms of skills, they might not be as good as the Lung brothers, but they were not far off. With the 3-on-3 battle formation, they were confident in dealing with 100 Siamese soldiers. Meng Wu took the sword and looked back at Xianxia Hamad, who had been rescued. He nodded lightly and left with his 4 soldiers. After leaving the dungeon, he rode straight to the east gate. At this moment in Bangkok, cannons were fired from time to time. The soldiers patrolling the streets mostly hid in places they thought were safe. Meng Wu led the 4 riders all the way to the east gate, where they saw thousands of Siamese soldiers standing guard. I was appointed by General Ha Chunwang to open the city gates. Anyone who tries to stop me will be killed. Raising the sword in his hand high up, Meng Wu's shout rang out, causing many of the soldiers guarding the city to be dumbfounded. What the hell was this about opening the city gates? Don't tell me there's no need to continue guarding? A young Siamese general stepped forward and expressed his doubts. Meng Wu did not kill him. After all, the man in front of him was a Siamese soldier. He explained, General Ha Chunwang has received the king's permission to open the gate and surrender. Now, all we need to do is to open the gate. This way we can avoid dying in the war. I see. After hearing this, the young Siamese general nodded in agreement. Most of the soldiers did not have the confidence to defend a lone city. Although there were many who were not afraid of death, no one wanted to sacrifice their lives for nothing. Now that there was an order from above, no one would defend the city gates. The thick gate slowly opened from the inside. The 5-star army, who had already reached the city gates in the dark, surged forward. The one at the front was the 5th Lu Division. They all held powerful firearms to open the way. The 6th young master's order was that if there was any danger, they could fire on their own. However, there were no gunshots. With Meng Wu around, the soldiers had already given up on resisting. The 5th Lu Division quickly took over the duty of guarding the city gates. Behind them were the brothers of the 1st Cavalry Division. With Division Commander Tian Hu in the lead, the mighty cavalry entered the city. Then, according to the plan, they charged straight for the capital of Bangkok. Following closely behind was the new army's 1st Cavalry Division. After Division Commander Lu Zhua and Meng Wu met up, they headed towards the northern city gate. They were going to open it up like before and lead the Northern Army's 5-star army into the city. In the diplomatic compound, General Ha Chunwang looked at the sword on his neck with a hopeless expression. Then he looked bitterly at Ma Dali and said, Commander Ma, do you think that by kidnapping me, the 5-star army will be able to enter the city smoothly? Ha Chunwang had only brought 30 soldiers to the compound to express his sincerity. He did not expect that the other party would actually dare to make a move on him. Now, he had failed in his own territory. What do you think? Ma Dali answered calmly. He even had the opportunity to take a sip of tea. He looked very confident. A platoon of Lung Feng suddenly attacked and caught Ha Chunwang off guard. The 30 guards he brought with him were either killed or injured. He himself was also subdued and his sword was taken away. In the face of this sudden turn of events, he was naturally stunned. However, he knew that this time, there was nothing he could do. Without him as the commander, if the 5-star army really launched an attack, how would he deal with it? Ha Chunwang did not know that the 5-star army had already entered the city. The east and north gates opened without shedding a drop of blood. Faced with the 5-star army entering the city, the streets were already in chaos. Some of the Siamese soldiers resisted on their own without orders. However, most of the soldiers retreated to their barracks. Without orders, they did not know whether they should resist or not. They simply retreated to their barracks and waited for orders. The 1st Cavalry Division that had slaughtered their way into the inner city was like an unstoppable sword. Along the way, anyone who stood in their way was quickly eliminated. In less than 2 hours, they had arrived at the palace. At this moment, facing the sudden arrival of the 5-star army, the palace was already in chaos. The 5,000 palace guards who were left behind to guard the palace started a desperate resistance. At the same time, they sent out a call for reinforcements, hoping that reinforcements would arrive before the cavalry breached the palace. However, it was useless. How powerful was the 1st Cavalry Division? When faced with pure cold weapons, even Lung Feng was no match for them, not to mention the palace guards who were used to living in luxury and were used to being superior. These people were arrogant. It was useful to scare ordinary soldiers. However, when faced with the elite 5-star army cavalry who were used to life and death, they did not even take an hour. After throwing nearly 2,000 corpses, they completely collapsed. Some fled and some surrendered. The king of Siam, Li Qi, was sitting in the main hall in his royal attire. Beside him stood hundreds of palace guards. However, at this moment, their faces were filled with fear. Obviously, these people knew what they were about to face and were already terrified. However, Li Qi's expression was calm. After all, he was the king who had founded the glorious era of the great city. He was still very courageous. He even once thought that the glory of Siam was about to arrive. As the king, he had a bright future. However, he had no choice but to meet the 5-star army. The sudden appearance of this army destroyed his original plans for the country and for his life. If the king had read about the 3 kingdoms, he would have immediately thought of He Shengdong's idea. The moment the cannons roared above the capital, he had a bad feeling in his heart. His intuition told him that the 5-star army was about to attack the city. He immediately ordered someone to look for Chun Hong to discuss the upcoming battle of defending the city. Unfortunately, he did not find him. Not long after, news came that the city gate had been breached and the 5-star army had entered the city. When he first heard the news, Li Qi almost fell from his throne. He knew that everything was over. The 5-star army had entered the city without shedding any blood. He was afraid that he would be in danger soon. He immediately gave the order to summon more troops to protect the palace. However, at this moment, he realized that the commander's seal was not in his hands. He could only blame himself for trusting Chun Hong too much. He was afraid that Chun Hong would not be able to command the troops and handed over the commander's seal. Now, he did not have the commander's seal. Mobilizing the troops was just a thought. What happened next was very clear. The vanguard cavalry of the 5-star army had arrived. The 5,000 palace guards were defeated in less than an hour. As the king, Li Qi knew that the situation had changed. However, he did not want to throw away his dignity as the king of the country. Thus, he brought over 100 guards to guard the palace. At this moment, he still had a glimmer of hope. That was that the troops that came to save the king could arrive. When that time came, with the advantage in numbers, he might be able to fight against the 5-star army. As long as he could hold on for long enough, the other countries that did not like the 5-star army or did not want to see the 5-star army grow stronger would take action. When that time came, there might be a chance of victory. Li Qi, who had hope in his heart, saw the 5-star army in front of him. He knew that the situation had changed. In the end, all thoughts were just thoughts. You must be the king of Siam. If you surrender now, you can still live. Your guards can also be spared from death. Tian, who walked in with 2 swords in his hands. He looked at Li Qi, who was still sitting on the throne, and said loudly. Li Qi was not moved by Tianhu's persuasion. He wanted to continue resisting. Perhaps the longer he held on, the more chances he would have. Since Li Qi did not surrender, Tianhu did not hold back. He knew that there were close to 400,000 Siamese soldiers in the city. If he did not seize the moment, there might be a change in the situation. A ruthless look flashed across his eyes. He pointed to the opposite side and said, "Archers, get ready. Other than the king, kill everyone else." Chapter 1054. In terms of archery, if the 1st Cavalry Division said that they were the 2nd, then no one would dare to say that they were the 1st. They were able to hit their target 9 times out of 10 when they were riding on a bumpy horse, not to mention when there was no interference. Now, thousands of arrows were released at the same time. After just one round of arrows, less than 20 of the 100 or so palace guards were left standing. Li Qi, who was sitting there, was not threatened by the arrows, but at this moment he was still scared to the point that his face turned pale. He was a famous king, and he had also created a prosperous era, but after all, he had not experienced the killing on the battlefield. When he really faced death, he was still afraid. "Don't shoot anymore, this king surrenders." Finally, he could not stand the threat and surrendered. With this shout, the seemingly powerful Siam immediately collapsed, becoming a stepping stone for the 5-star army to continue to rise. The long night finally passed, and the moment the sky slowly brightened, more 5-star army entered the city. Until noon, with the King Li Qi's declaration of surrender, and the first-grade General Ha Chunwang took out the commander's seal to command the army, Siam immediately became a record in history. Yang Chendong followed the army into the city. This time, he took the risk to enter the city with the speed of lightning. Every step of the plan was very crucial. It could be said that if there was a problem at any step, it would lead to a confrontation between the two armies. If that was the case, he did not know how many days it would take, and how many people would have to die to capture Bangkok. Fortunately, all the plans were implemented smoothly, and in the end he still won. As soon as he entered the city, Yang Chendong met the former Prime Minister Hamad and General Meng Wu in the palace. They would also be important talents who would help him manage and rule Siam in the future. In front of everyone, he first changed the name of Siam to Thailand Province, and then appointed a person named Zhang Zhao as the governor of Thailand. This management talent, who had worked in the Chichen city for more than 4 years, was finally released and became a real power manager. As soon as possible, restore the power of the people, restore the economy, and the migration of the population. I will ask you to do it. I hope that the next time this prince comes, this place will have changed greatly, and I will be able to see sincere and satisfied smiles on the people's faces. After stating his wishes, Yang Chendong arranged for people to send Li Qi to Crimson Nest City. He would become another king who was under house arrest there. He was not the first, nor would he be the last. The next day, Yang Chendong led the 1st Cavalry Division and the 1st Cavalry Division of the new 1st Army to the Liangshan area in the north. In his heart, he was more concerned about his Han brothers. Before he left, he also gave a certain explanation about the Thailand province and the Daf country. The 1st Sea Division went to the Daf country and surrounded the Daf country's capital with the 3rd Sea Division. The 2nd Sea Division wandered around the Gulf of Thailand to declare the sovereignty of this place and not allow any forces to enter and invade. The 2nd Army Commander Luo Pa temporarily stayed in the Thailand province, together with a coalition of 100,000 foreigners. They were responsible for the security, defense, and the task of reorganizing the 380,000 Siam army. The 6th Division went north to Laos province and cooperated with the governor, Luan Shaochen, to continue to be responsible for the suppression and deterrence of the Awol dynasty. The remaining 100,000 foreigners continued to go north and followed Yang Chendong to the Liangshan area. They were responsible for the possible battle there against Nanming King Zhu Huaiqiu and the Bengal army. If there was time, Yang Chendong certainly did not want to run around. He would first stay in the newly established Thailand province for a while to stabilize the situation here. Now it was November. After a month, he would return to Crimson City before the end of the year and celebrate the new year with his wives. Especially since the first madam, Hu Yan, was pregnant and needed him to comfort her. Time waits for no man. The Southern Ming matter concerned the safety of too many Han people. He had to rush there and deal with any problems that could happen at any time. The truth was just as Yang Chendong expected. The Southern Ming matter was indeed changing. After King Mubin of Shiping was pincered from two sides and was forced to retreat to the Kelisai region, King Nanming's army joined up with the Bengal army from the east. With their combined forces, their forces began to grow. Just in Yunnan alone, the self-proclaimed King Nanming, the second brother of Zhu Huichen, King Guangtong, Zhu Huichen, had recruited 150,000 soldiers. After absorbing the remaining soldiers left behind by King Mubin of Shiping, in addition to the 50,000 soldiers he had brought with him, his army instantly expanded to 200,000. Along with the 100,000 Bengal army that Rajiv of Bangra had brought, the total number of soldiers reached 300,000. With 300,000 soldiers, some people had enough confidence, and even started to have thoughts of spying on the Five-Star Army. They were spying on the Five-Star Army because they had their eyes on the guns in the hands of the Five-Star Army. Through the information that they had obtained, they knew that there was a Five-Star Army with less than 10,000 people that had rushed to Lang Son. They were working with Vietnam's General Hong Jin to settle down the Han people that had sought refuge here. The Five-Star Army had been recruiting homeless Han people, and this matter was not a secret. Regarding this, everyone had different opinions. In this era where human rights were not valued, the lives of the commoners were like grass. This was especially so for the commoners who had no money and no food. Using the word refugees to describe them was the most appropriate. They really did not know what they could do by recruiting such people. Was it really because they had too much food to eat? Although the appearance of high-yield crops like potatoes had indeed solved the problem of the commoners' stomachs. However, with so many commoners going over, not only did they have to eat, but they also had to wear clothes and housing. All in all, it was not a small financial burden. Even if one had a large family, facing such a huge population, one would not be able to handle it. In truth, at the start of the year, when Yang Chendong was still in Chichen City, they had already started to test out the pension insurance policy. It was not much different from the future, except that the workers and commoners would pay a certain amount of insurance each year, ensuring that they would not have to worry about food and clothing in their later years. The only difference was that the age limit for men to receive insurance was set at 50 years old, while women were set at 48 years old. After all, in that era, people's lifespans were relatively short. If they could only retire at 60 years old, it would be a huge blow to everyone's enthusiasm. Because it was a trial, only the Han people could participate in the insurance. Other foreign races did not have the right to participate in this policy. Even so, they were not able to receive much gold and silver, which greatly reduced the financial burden on Chichen City. Yang Xie was very good at earning money, this was publicly acknowledged. Their products were very diverse, and just from the business side, the profits they brought every year were shocking. However, at the same time, they could also spend money. Some provinces were still not self-sufficient and still needed to rely on Chichen City for subsidies. In addition, there were constant battles, and the financial pressure was immense. Once this insurance policy was released, it would indeed solve a lot of problems. It would also allow Yang Shi to have the ability to continue recruiting more homeless Han people. Zhu Huichen did not know about this, nor did he care about it. What he was interested in was the firearms in the hands of the High 7th Division. He had thought that if he could obtain such advanced weapons, when he faced off against the Southern Ming Empire, his confidence would be greatly boosted. Even unifying the entire Southern Ming Empire would not be a problem. With this thought in mind, Zhu Huichi looked for General Rajiv of the Bangladesh Army and Wu Yingtu of the Miao province, who followed him to discuss whether they should ambush a 5-star army and snatch their weapons. The three of them gathered together, and when they heard that they were going to face off against the 5-star army, Wu Yingtu, who knew the details, was the first to speak. It is said that the 5-star army is very powerful, it is not wise to be their enemy. Speaking of which, Wu Ying too had also heard about the encounter between Miao Jin Long and the Five-Star Army. He had some lingering fears and was even a little scared. The remaining General Rajiv was dumbfounded. Obviously, his understanding of the Five-Star Army was lacking. He could not understand why Wu Ying too, who looked very sturdy, would be so cautious and even a little afraid when talking about this army. Zhu Huichen laughed. Wu Feng, although the Five-Star Army is powerful, we have already received news that their main force is attacking Siam. There are 400,000 troops there. It is enough to make them suffer. Taking advantage of this opportunity, we should be able to deal with the Five-Star Army. Moreover, I never fight an unprepared battle. I have already arranged for 3,000 elite soldiers to disguise themselves as ordinary Han people and head to Liangshan shelter. Once we launch an attack, we can attack from both sides and victory will definitely belong to us. At this time, Guangdong King no longer hid his trump card and showed it to everyone. At this point, Wu Ying too finally stopped talking. After all, his Miao army only had 10,000 soldiers out of the 200,000 soldiers. If not for the fact that he brought the elites of the Miao army, he would not even have the right to speak. Rajiv was a person who was proficient in the Chinese language. This was the main reason why he could lead 100,000 Bengali soldiers. When he heard that he could take advantage of the situation, he could not help but say, "Since that is the case, what are we waiting for? Your Highness, let's make our move tonight." "Sai, there is no hurry. The agreed time is 3 days later. We still need to wait for the brothers over there to be ready," Zhu Huichen said calmly. Obviously, he already had a card up his sleeve. The 3,000 elite soldiers were indeed arranged to enter Liangshan shelter. Regarding this matter, the commander of the 7th Army, Tian Su, who was in charge of the shelter, and the temporary general of the shelter, Vietnamese General Hong Jin, knew nothing about it. There were simply too many Han people who came to seek refuge and protection every day. There were so many that they did not even have the time to distinguish between them. This also caused the shelter to be a mix of good and bad people, and even incidents of fighting occurred frequently. Chapter 1055. As long as no lives were lost, the Five-Star Army would not care. After all, they did not have enough manpower to do so. The 7th Army had over 8,000 men, and even with the 15,000 men of Vietnam General Hong Jin, they only had about 20,000 men. Facing the hundreds and thousands of Hans that were rushing over every day, they were not strong enough. "General Hong, I've already received a telegram. The matter at Xianluo City has been resolved. Currently, the 6th Young Master is leading 2 cavalry units north. We just need to stabilize the situation. Once the 6th Young Master arrives, everything will be fine." Tian Su looked at the number of people in the shelter and felt worried. However, he did not show it on his face. As a general, one of the most important things was to learn to be calm. No matter what the situation was, they would not panic. As an experienced veteran, Tian Su naturally understood this principle. When he heard that the 6th Young Master was leading his elite cavalry towards Lang Sun, the worried Hong Jin heaved a sigh of relief. "That's good. How about this? I'll immediately arrange for the troops to send a group of people back. Otherwise, as the number of people in the shelter increases, there will be problems sooner or later." Arranging for the troops to send the people back would require them to pass through the Lang Sun rainforest. That meant that they would have to split up. Tian Su, who was already lacking in manpower, did not object. He agreed and said, "All right, I'll leave it to General Hong." Just like that, the Five-Star Army, which was originally lacking in manpower, was split up by another 3,000 soldiers. As such, the total number of soldiers left in Langshan was only slightly over 20,000. However, there were still 50,000 civilians left in Langshan. Furthermore, more and more people were arriving every day. At this rate, the pressure would only increase. What was even more unexpected to Tian Su was that among the nearly 50,000 people, there were also 3,000 elite soldiers sent by King Guangdong, Zhu Huihua. They disguised themselves as ordinary people and scattered around. In the chaotic situation, they did not attract the attention of others. It was only on the night of the appointment that these people began to gather together. Some of the smarter ones had already figured out the timing and method of the 5-star army's change of guard. Considering the limited manpower, Tian Su decided to use the Cold Front Army and the Vietnamese army to defend together. They would rotate every 6 hours, and there would be 4 shifts a day. Each shift consisted of a battalion of Cold Vanguard soldiers and 1,000 Vietnamese soldiers. The Vietnamese army was mainly in charge of the safety and order of the shelter, while the Cold Front was in charge of defending the outer perimeter, preventing the Prince of Little Nanming's army and the Bangladesh army from launching an attack on them. On this point, the Heavenly Strategy Division Master and General Hong Jin came to an agreement. They did not think that the opponent had the guts to provoke them. However, for the sake of safety, they still made a basic defense. That night, Battalion Commander Zhou Shishue brought a battalion of 400 soldiers to take over the defense. They would be responsible for the security of the perimeter for the next 6 hours. At that time, the sky would be bright. It was November. Even in the south, it was cold in the mornings. After the soldiers arrived at their positions, they quickly quieted down. In order to preserve the heat in their bodies, there were very few people who spoke. After Battalion Commander Zhou began to change the defense, Zhu Jian also began to gather his 3,000 subordinates to prepare for a counterattack. According to Prince Guangtong's plan, they had decided to launch a surprise attack at night, leaving them less than an hour. Zhu Jian was a subordinate that Zhu Huiyun had favored, and this time, he had given him such an important mission. General Zhu also wanted to make use of this opportunity to showcase his skills. As he gathered his subordinates, he called for a few of the leaders and instructed them, "In a while, we will first deal with the 1,000 Vietnamese soldiers. Their strength is average and not hard to deal with. After that, we will set fire to the perimeter. After that, the 500 of you will join me to deal with the 5-star army. They have many firearms in their hands. Once we can get our hands on one, we will have done a great deed. The more we get, the greater the merit, understand? Please rest assured, General Zhu, we know what to do." A few of the leaders had a smug look on their faces, before they laughed coldly, as though their evil plan was about to succeed. Time passed by slowly, and there was only a quarter of an hour left before the agreed time to launch the attack. Zhu Jian then gestured for them to start moving, and the 3,000 elite soldiers immediately pulled out their weapons, as they slowly made their way towards the 1,000 Vietnamese soldiers. How could the 1,000 Vietnamese soldiers know that something like this would happen? Some of them were still leaning against the trees, resting with their eyes closed. Suddenly, their mouths were covered by someone, and they felt a sharp pain in their necks. Their strength was quickly drained away, and their blood flowed out. This scene happened in many different places, and one by one, the unprepared Vietnamese soldiers were killed. In order to cover up the stench of blood, and to prevent the 5-star army from coming to their aid, huge fires started to burn all over the shelter, and soon after, the sky was dyed red by the blazing flames. Zhu Jian and the rest have already begun to move, order the entire army to attack. On the outskirts of Lang Mountain, Prince Guangtong Zhu Huiyun's eyes flashed with a pleased glint as he gave the order to attack. At the same time, he turned to General Rajiv and said, "This time, it's up to your cavalry." "That's easy. We have 20,000 cavalry, and it's enough to trample any enemy formation," Rajiv said with a face full of pride, as he also had the confidence to do so. After all, when cavalry faced infantry, they had a natural advantage. In this way, the hooves of the horses stomped on the ground, and the rumbling of the ground resounded. In the darkness, a black mass of enemies flew toward the Langshan asylum. The moment the flames started to burn behind them, Zhou Shishue knew that things weren't looking good, and a few of his company commanders had also requested for a counterattack. However, he felt that things weren't that simple. Was it just a few fires behind them? Thinking about the 300,000 enemy troops, Zhou Shishue decisively gave up on the idea of turning back to extinguish the flames. Instead, he ordered all the soldiers to focus their attention and prevent the enemy from breaking through from the front. Zhou Shishue's estimation was right, and soon he heard the sound of hooves stomping on the ground. His intuition told him that the number of cavalry coming from the opposite side wouldn't be too small, and it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that it was a magnificent army. He immediately shouted, "Everyone take out grenades. Once the enemy is too close, we'll fight with them." The threat of firearms to cavalry was still too small. After all, the warhorses were too fast, and they might not even be able to fire a few shots before the enemy arrived in front of them. Only weapons like grenades could stop the enemy for a moment, but of course, they also had to pay a heavy price. However, at this moment, Zhou Shishue had already disregarded his own life and death. What he was thinking about now was how to buy time for the army behind him and the shelter to retreat. As for his own battalion, since fate had chosen him, they could only resign themselves to fate. After the order was given, the 400 soldiers of the battalion all raised their spirits, and then looked forward with a deep expression. At this moment, their hands holding their guns tightened, and their eyes became more profound. At this moment, the 400 soldiers already knew what it meant when the battalion commander didn't give the order to retreat, but no one said a word. Since they had chosen to join the cold front, they had to be prepared to face death at any time. This was the oath they had sworn the moment they joined the army. Family, relatives, friends, comrades, farewell, I believe that you will avenge us. Fire. Under the dim moonlight, Zhou Shishue noticed that the black shadows were getting closer and closer, and he immediately gave the order to fire. The soldiers of the cold front were prepared to die, and now they were firing bullets out of their guns. At this moment, they didn't care about aiming at the enemy, nor did they care about saving bullets. At this moment, only the sound of gunfire could be heard, and light flashed out one after another, shooting towards the approaching enemy. At the rear of the camp, the sound of hooves could be heard from the fire at the front. Division Commander Tian Su and Vietnamese General Hong Jin both walked out of their tents. Not good, the enemy has really launched an attack. General Hong quickly split the men into two groups. One group will take the supplies, while the other group will rush to the shelter. Take as many people as you can. If you can't take the supplies, burn them on the spot. Don't leave them for the enemy. The rest of the 7 divisions, follow me and attack. Tian Su only stayed silent for a few breaths before he made a series of military arrangements. Division Commander Tian, you should retreat with us. Hong Jin's face was filled with anxiety. Everyone knew that if they stayed behind to fight the enemy, there would definitely be sacrifices. The members of the cold front were all treasures. General Hong, there is no need to persuade me. What I said just now is a military order, please carry it out. As he spoke, Tian Su had already taken the gun holster from the guard and hung it on his body. Then he led the main force of the 7 divisions and rushed forward. Tian Su's first goal was not to put out the fire, because at this moment, the fire was already too big to be controlled. What he wanted to do now was to rescue the battalion that was responsible for defending the perimeter. That was the 400 Cold Front brothers. However, the soldiers of the 7 divisions had only rushed forward a few hundred meters when a series of explosions sounded in their ears. From afar, they could see flashes of fire. Seeing this, Division Commander Tian Su couldn't help but punch a tree beside him, his face filled with anger. As a soldier of the cold front, he naturally knew what caused the explosion. It was definitely caused by a grenade being ignited. Considering the limited range of the grenade, didn't that mean that their comrades had already come into close contact with the enemy? Chapter 1056. That was an opponent with 300,000 soldiers. With only 400 people, it was easy to guess what kind of situation would occur. Everyone knew that the entire battalion of Lung Feng brothers was probably going to be wiped out. What should we do? 1st Regiment Commander Bu Hai walked in front of Tian Su and asked for instructions. His mood was very heavy since this battalion of soldiers belonged to his regiment. Stop advancing. Plant landmines to stop the enemy from advancing. Then retreat in batches. Even though Tian Su wanted to lead his brothers to charge forward, his rationality told him that this was not the time to fight. There were still many people in the shelter who had not retreated. They had not completed their mission and could not do as they pleased. 1st Regiment Commander Bu Hai also had an indignant look on his face. He was sad that he couldn't save his comrades, But he also knew that the decision of his division commander was correct. With just one division, it was impossible for them to defeat the 300,000 enemy, not to mention the existence of the cavalry. Plant landmines and retreat as we fight. Bu Hai said with hatred. The moment he turned around to carry out the order, tears flowed out uncontrollably from the corner of his eyes. At the front line, grenades were detonated one after another. Cold vanguard soldiers died together with the enemy cavalry. Not even their bones were left behind. In just 15 minutes, the 100 soldiers of the 1st Battalion had all died. Battalion Commander Zhou Shixue's eyes were filled with tears as he gave another order, 2nd Company, forward. Even though they knew that they would die without a doubt if they charged forward, the 2nd Company commander and all the soldiers did not hesitate at all. After agreeing, they all ran out of the trench. If one looked closely, one could see that everyone was holding at least 2 grenades in their hands. It was clear that they were prepared to take the enemy down with them. Boom, boom. Another explosion sounded. 2nd Company, down. 3rd Company, down. Very quickly, the 3rd Company was also gone. When only the 4th Company was left, Zhou Shixue also took out 2 grenades and held them in his arms. He also took out his Type 5 gun. He would rather die than let the gun fall into the hands of the enemy. The gun would be there if the person was alive, and the gun would be destroyed if the person was dead. This was the death rule that the cold vanguard soldiers had to abide by. Comrades, we won't die in vain. The 6th young master will definitely avenge us. Everyone charge with me. Following Zhou Shixue's shout, hundreds of soldiers rushed out of the trenches in a scattered formation towards the incoming cavalry. Every one of them looked like they were ready to die, with smiles and satisfaction on their faces. Boom, 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 boom. The sounds of explosions were endless. This was a heroic song, a song composed by the soldiers of the Cold Vanguard. They used their actions and their lives to illustrate what it meant to fight to the last second, what it meant to die a worthy death, and what it meant to die a worthy death. Zhou Shixue's 1st Battalion of 400 soldiers had all died in exchange for the 5-star Army's time to retreat. Other than the rations that they brought with them, the rest were all burned. They didn't leave anything for the enemy. It was just that because they were in a rush, out of the 50,000 civilians, only 10,000 were brought away. It was just that once the war started, the situation was too chaotic. They didn't listen to orders and ran around randomly. There were even some who directly escaped to the barracks of the Little South Ming Army. The 5-star Army took the initiative to retreat into the Liangshan rainforest. Once they entered the forest, there were giant trees everywhere. If one were to enter the forest without any experience, he or she would be surrounded by danger. This kind of natural protective environment stopped the Little South Ming Army and the Bangladeshis from chasing after them. After the battle, they destroyed the 5-star Army's shelter and captured 40,000 civilians. Although they did not manage to snatch the rations, Zhu Huijin was still very satisfied with the harvest. That was the 5-star Army. It was said that they were very powerful and no one dared to go against them. Now that they were chased away by him, didn't that mean that he was much more powerful than the 5-star Army? After the 5-star Army was chased away, the arrogant Zhu Huijin decided to go to the troop division. He wanted to eliminate the remaining troops of Xiping Wang and completely eliminate the hidden dangers left here. Once the rear was stable, it would be time for him to go to the east and attack the Great South Ming Army. Yang Chendong received the news that the Little South Ming Army had attacked and the shelter was forced to retreat. When he heard this, he was not as anxious as before. The Little South Ming Army had 300,000 soldiers and this was only one area. If the Little South Ming King's army was included, this number would probably double. However, he only had 2 cavalry divisions, and no matter how good he was at fighting, it would be difficult for him to win against so many enemies. Moreover, most of the enemies were Han Chinese, and unless it was absolutely necessary, he did not want to make an enemy out of the Han Chinese and cause internal strife. Inform the 100,000 foreign troops behind us and tell them to hurry up and meet up with us. Tell the cavalry brothers to stop and rest for 3 days. Take good care of the war horses and rest. After days of rushing, even Yang Chendong felt a bit tired, let alone the ordinary cavalry soldiers. Sixth young master, our brothers from the 1st Cavalry Division can hold on. Hearing that they were going to stop, Division Commander Tian, who did not know what was going on ahead, volunteered. With their level of training, it was just rushing for days. It was not a big deal. The division commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Lu Zhua, also wanted to take the opportunity to say that they could continue. However, Yang Chendong waved his hand and said, "I told you to rest, so rest. This is an order." With a simple sentence, the two division commanders stopped talking and started to carry out the order. The army stopped at the border between Laos and Yunnan province and started to rest. After Yang Chendong got off his horse, he took the letter that said that the Little South Ming army was marching towards Cheli Division. After reading it, he threw it aside. Speaking of which, what did Shiping King's order have to do with him? He wanted more of these dog-eat-dog situations to happen. Yang Chendong did not care about Shiping King Mubin's life, but he cherished his own life. Not long after he settled down in Cheli Division, he received news that King Guangtong Zhu Huihua and the Bangladesh army were coming for him. He was so shocked that he almost fell off his chair. He quickly asked someone to call Wang Ji, the former Minister of War, and Mu Ong over to discuss countermeasures. After a short meeting, the three of them agreed on the same thing, which was to retreat. At this moment, they only had 50,000 Mu clan soldiers in their hands. Among them, only 20,000 were true elites. No matter what, they would not be a match for 300,000 enemies. Even if they knew that they could not win, why fight? It was better to retreat and preserve their strength. We can't bring all 50,000. There are too many people. We can't supply enough food, Wang Ji said. Then we'll only bring 20,000 elites. Mu Bin was also very generous. He decided to leave 30,000 soldiers behind. Muong wanted to say something, but after thinking for a while, he decided not to. In his opinion, a good general would not abandon his soldiers at will. But now, the situation was urgent. For their own safety, they had no choice but to make some painful decisions. Mu Bin did not announce the decision to leave 30,000 Mu soldiers behind. Instead, he said that he would take 20,000 elites to attack the enemy's flanks. When the time came, they would attack from two sides. Out of trust in King Shiping, the 30,000 Mu soldiers believed him and stayed in Cheli Division. However, when they were surrounded by a large number of soldiers and did not see King Shiping appear, they realized that they had been deceived. These people were also straightforward. Since they knew that they had been abandoned, they might as well just surrender. Like this, Zhu Huihua took down the 30,000 Mu army without shedding a drop of blood. He took down Cheli Division and his strength increased greatly. As for the 20,000 elite Mu soldiers that Mu Bin brought with him, no one knew where they went. It was as if they had disappeared into thin air. However, Zhu Huihua thought that the other party only had 20,000 people. They could not cause any trouble. Zhu Huihua did not care about it. The most important thing was that he had received news that Bugnam of Gojoseon was coming to him with his men. This attracted all his attention. Bugnam of Gojoseon Yang Chendong's debut was like a mystery from the beginning. Even if the 5-star army now had great power, it was still puzzling how he rose to such a scale. It was as if there was an additional force in the realm. In particular, ever since the establishment of the 5-star army, it had been successful in every endeavor. No opponent seemed to be able to stop their vanguard. This made his status even more legendary. Just based on this, Zhu Huihua wanted to have a battle with him. He wanted to see if the other party was really as powerful as the legend said. Zhu Huihua was still thinking that if he could defeat Bugnam of Gojoseon, his name would be spread all over the world. At that time, it would not be impossible for him to seek the title of emperor. Yes, Zhu Huihua had always been very ambitious, especially when it came to his brother, the former King Minzhuang, the current King Little Nanming. Zhu Huihua had always wanted to replace his brother, but he just lacked the right opportunity. Now that he had more than 300,000 troops in his hands, he believed that the opportunity had come. As long as he could defeat the 5-star army led by Bugnam of Gojoseon, then he would have the qualifications to challenge his brother. He would also usher in his own career and glory. Having confidence was one thing, but the battle record of the 5-star army was there. Moreover, they also had firearms. All of these made Zhu Huihua have no choice but to deal with them. He called over a group of generals and began to discuss the strategic arrangements. When it came to war, this person still had some ability. More than 300,000 soldiers were spread out according to his arrangements, scattered in the borders of Yunnan and Guangxi. It was guaranteed that as long as the 5-star soldiers left Langshan, they would be able to pounce on them like locusts, encircling them and eating them. Time passed day by day, and both sides began to make arrangements. Yang Chendong also waited for the arrival of the 100,000 foreign allied troops. Under his command, the 100,000 troops were divided into 5 divisions. Each division had 20,000 people. Chapter 1057. Furthermore, he had chosen 4 company leaders from the Black Cavalry to be the division commanders. These people had already displayed their talent and ability to command troops. Now that they finally had the chance to lead troops, their wishes had been fulfilled. These 5 people were the 1st Regiment Commander Niu Duo, the 2nd Regiment Commander Tu Hai, the 3rd Regiment Commander Luan Xiaozheng, the 4th Regiment Commander Chu Duo, as well as the 5th Regiment Commander Mo Benyi. The 5 of them were all promoted to senior colonel and could be considered to have been promoted to the front lines. The 5 foreign races, the 1st Cavalry Army, and the 1st Cavalry Division, a total of 120,000 people had passed through Yunnan Province and the rainforest, heading straight for Langsun. While waiting for the army to arrive, Yang Chendong had also thought about how to deal with the Han army. Although he did not wish for the Han people to exhaust themselves, it was just a thought in his mind. Since it was a war, there would always be deaths. Blindly thinking about settling the southern Ming issue peacefully was not going to work. Only by fighting a few battles and letting the other party feel pain and fear would they be able to sit down and negotiate. Sometimes, the truth was decided through fighting. Regardless of whether Yang Chendong wanted to admit it or not, this was the truth. Since that was the case, he would just fight. After making up his mind, Yang Chendong changed his hesitation and gave the order to advance. However, he added a sentence at the end, that there was no need to be courteous when facing the Bangladesh army. If they could kill, then kill. Only when facing the Han army, if they could capture, then capture. For this reason, he set a standard for the 100,000 foreign races. What reward would they receive for killing 1 person? What reward would they receive for killing 3 people? What reward would they receive for capturing 1 person? What reward would they receive for capturing 3 or more people, etc.? The 100,000 foreign races who had originally wanted to use the military to change their lives were all excited when they saw the reward system. They knew that it was time to realize the value of their lives. As long as they performed perfectly, not only would they benefit, even their families would also benefit. As a result, the morale of the army was extremely high. Once they left the rainforest area, they would have a showdown with the southern Ming Empire's army. In order to fight this battle well, long before Yang Chendong arrived, the 7th Army had already sent out all of their scouts. In addition, Chief of Intelligence Yang Chendong had also sent out a large number of department elites to the 2 provinces to investigate the enemy situation. Thus, Zhu Huiqiu's military arrangements could be said to be extremely clear to Yang Chendong. Looking at the summary of intelligence collected by various departments, Yang Chendong couldn't help but sigh. This Lord Guangtong is not an idiot, he's really something. This judgment was based on Zhu Huiqiu's battlefield layout. From the intelligence, the enemy's military arrangements were very appropriate and orderly. It could basically guarantee that once one area was attacked, the other armies could quickly provide support. If things went wrong, the 5-star army would be entangled and then be drowned by the enemy's human wave tactics. The sand table was placed in front of him. Yang Chendong called over the 7 division commanders under him and let them understand the enemy's battlefield layout. When the red and black flags were placed in the 2 provinces, Tian Hu and the others were all shocked. Yang Chendong knew why they were shocked. After all, when he first received the news, he also sincerely praised them. Thus, he wasn't surprised. Instead, he smiled and asked the 7 division commanders, Come, tell me, what do you think? To be able to show their faces in front of the sixth young master, naturally, no one wanted to let go of this opportunity. At that moment, Lu Zhuo, as a veteran division commander, was the first to speak. Sixth young master, from what I see, this Lord Guangtong is quite capable. Look at his layout, it can be said that he is prepared to defend to the death. Especially the territory near Liang Mountain, it is like an iron bucket. If my guess is correct, they should want to trap us first, then after a war of attrition, they will gather their superior forces to fight us to the death and finally eat us. Division Commander Tian Hu sneered. He was laughing at Lord Guangtong's overestimation of his strength. Yang Chendong was also laughing. Although this time they brought a mixed army, they were not inexperienced on the battlefield. The war in Siam allowed these 100,000 people to grow. Although there was still a big gap between them and the real elites of the five-star army, such as the Cold Front, they could at least be regarded as a B-class army. As long as they were used well and their morale was boosted, winning this battle would not be a problem. The other 5 division commanders who led the foreign army had different expressions on their faces. However, it could be seen that they were not frightened. Instead, they were eager to try. This was their first battle after becoming division commanders. Naturally, everyone wanted to perform well. Taking in everyone's expressions, Yang Chendong looked at Tian Hu and said, "Come, Division Commander Tian, tell us, what do you think?" Although he was already a major general in front of Yang Chendong, Tian Hu was still a student. He first stood at attention, then took a wooden stick from the side and pointed at the sand table. "Everyone please look. After leaving Liang Mountain, 200 miles to the west is Yongji City. To the north is Linshan, and to the west is Siming Prefecture. This is like a pocket. Once someone enters, it can be firmly blocked. This is also the problem we will encounter after leaving the mountain." "That's right." The other division commanders, including Yang Chendong, nodded gently. Obviously, everyone agreed with this statement. At the same time, everyone wanted to hear what Tian Hu was going to say next. The problem was already in front of them. How to solve it was the most important thing. Yang Chendong also stared at Tian Hu. He already had a solution in his heart. He just didn't know if the two of them thought of the same thing. Under everyone's expectant gaze, Tian Hu opened his mouth. "Once we are surrounded by the enemy, it will be extremely difficult for us to eliminate them with the advantage of their military strength. If we fight with force, even if we can win, it will only be a lose-lose situation. Therefore, the only thing we can do is to break their arrangements. We can only rely on speed." When he heard the word speed, Yang Chendong's brows couldn't help but rise high. A satisfied expression appeared on his face. This result was exactly as he had expected. It seemed that Tian Hu already had the demeanor of a general. Without looking at other people's reactions, Tian Hu opened his mouth again. "In terms of military strength, we are inferior to the enemy. In terms of understanding the terrain, we are also inferior. Most of us are composed of foreign allied forces. We have just entered the southern Ming land, and there are many aspects that we need to adapt to. Just from this analysis, the situation is not good for us. But please don't forget that we still have 2 cavalry divisions, and one of them is the 1st Cavalry Division. This is our advantage, an advantage that the southern Ming army can't reach. As long as we fight with speed, we can disrupt the enemy's arrangements. As long as we don't let the enemy form an encirclement, we will have the opportunity to break them one by one. At that time, it will depend on whether everyone can grasp the opportunity." After finally expressing his opinion, Tian Hu returned to his original silent appearance, leaving the other division commanders there to discuss whether Tian Hu's plan was feasible. Yang Chendong saw everything in his eyes, but he didn't intend to interrupt. He just wanted to take the opportunity to see everyone's performance. After all, he wouldn't be able to stay with these division commanders in every battle. His ability to be independent was still being developed. After a short while, everyone stopped their discussion. Tu Hai, the commander of the 2nd Military Division, asked on behalf of the other commanders, "Commander Tian, we all know what you mean. But where do you plan to attack first by attacking the slow with speed?" "Linshan." Tian Hu pointed to the north on the sand table and said, "This place is bordered by Yongji to the west and Siming residence to the west. As long as we can disrupt this place, it will be the same as cutting off the enemy's gathering. At that time, no matter which side we attack, the difficulty will be much lower." Division Commander Tu Hai nodded, indicating that he agreed with this decision. However, he still asked a question: is it just relying on the 1st Cavalry Division? The intelligence has already said that there are more than 30,000 enemies in Linshan. You only have 10,000 people, and you will face the reinforcements of the Southern Ming Army at any time. Are you sure there won't be any problems? There isn't a target that the 1st Cavalry Division can't take down, Tian Hu said with a face full of pride. Then he looked at Lu Zhua. Of course, if Division Commander Lu's 1st Cavalry Division can cooperate with us and pretend to attack Yongji City, we can distract the enemy's attention. This will be a great help in reducing the pressure on our 1st Cavalry Division. No matter how arrogant the world's 1st Cavalry Division was, it was impossible for them to win against the Southern Ming Alliance's army of more than 300,000 people. No problem, the 1st Cavalry Division is willing to cooperate with Division Commander Tian, Lu Zhua said. From being the 1st Division Commander of the new division to the current Division Commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, he spent most of his time assisting in battles. Adding on the fact that he was cooperating with the 1st Cavalry Division, he didn't think that it was shameful to be assisting in battles. Many thanks. Seeing Lu Zhua agree so quickly, Tian Hu's face revealed a look of gratitude. Since the 2 cavalry divisions had expressed their opinions, the other 5 division commanders naturally didn't have any doubts. They immediately said in unison, "Then we have no problems. As long as Division Commander Tian can break the enemy's formation, we only need 3 days to take down Ming residents." The 7 division commanders made a battle plan. Yang Chendong nodded, indicating that he approved. Next, each side began to make various preparations. This time, Yang Chendong didn't have any intention of using the 7th Army. He wanted to test the strength of the Southern Ming Army. Whether or not they could take down Ming residents within 3 days became the goal of the test. If the facts proved that this army could be used, then he would give them more important missions in the future and give them the opportunity to become stronger. On the other hand, if the facts proved that they couldn't, then he would think of a way to develop other armies. Chapter 1058. Unifying the world and making the Han Chinese the leader, this was something that many experts had never thought of before. Not only did Yang Chendong think of it, but he also wanted to make it a reality. Originally, he would have to face all sorts of problems, and some of the decisions he made would have to be made repeatedly. However, once the facts proved that he was right, he would definitely persevere. Just like the Foreign Alliance, the outcome of this battle would determine whether Yang Chendong would vigorously develop them in the future or directly cancel them. After the decision was made, as the side that was going to attack the city, the 5 foreign races alliance continued to travel through the rainforest. They also used their rest time to cut down trees and make ladders. Although they had not completely left the rainforest and arrived at Lang's Sun, the aura of war was already very strong. Another 10 days passed, and the 120,000 5-star army finally arrived at Lang's Sun, meeting up with the 7th Army and the Vietnamese Army. The Heavenly Strategies Division and Hong Jin came up to Yang Chendong with a guilty look on their faces. After whispering to the 6th young master, they did not dare to raise their heads. "Raise your heads." Looking at the 2 generals, Yang Chendong shouted angrily. Being shouted at, the 2 of them had no choice but to raise their heads, and they saw Yang Chendong's angry expression. When their eyes met, the latter said, "This battle was not your fault. The enemy had 300,000 people, and you only had 20,000. This was not a fair battle. You were able to escape unscathed, and even brought back 10,000 Han civilians. This is already a great achievement. What is there to be ashamed of? One couldn't be without pride. Otherwise, he wouldn't be a qualified general." If Tian Su and Hong Jin couldn't recover, Yang Chendong would have no choice but to transfer them out of their current posts and take up civilian positions elsewhere. After all, if a general was not hot-blooded, how could he win a battle? Now, the questioning was just his last effort. It would be best if he could scold them to wake them up, but if he couldn't, he could only give up. Luckily, Tiansu and Hong Jin were still very courageous. They felt guilty not because they couldn't defeat the Southern Ming Alliance, but because they had suffered losses in this battle, especially the 7th Army. Zhao Shishue's 1st Regiment and 1st Battalion were completely annihilated. Not a single person escaped. As a teacher, Tiansu felt that he had a responsibility. Originally, he thought that the 6th young master would blame him, but unexpectedly, that was not the case at all. The two raised their heads and saluted together, saying, "6th young master, don't worry, we're already prepared. We're just waiting for the main force to arrive. Once the order is given, we'll join the counterattack. We want to avenge our comrades who died in the shelter. Revenge is a must, but we won't need you in the first battle. The 7th Army will stay by this young master's side. The Vietnamese army will continue to take care of the Han people, including the captives on the battlefield. Do you have any problems with that?" Comparatively speaking, as a local army, the strength of the Vietnamese army was considered the weakest. At most, they could be considered as a C-grade soldier. Even if there were many of them, their usefulness on the battlefield would be limited. Knowing that, it would be better to leave them at the rear and do some work within their capabilities. Since it was Yang Chendong's order, of course no one would object. The two generals thus agreed. After the two sides met up, they prepared to leave Lang's Sun and attack the Little Nanming Alliance. This time, Yang Chendong wanted to use reality to tell those who dared to spy on the 5-star army that they were not to be trifled with. They had already made their preparations. On the 3rd day after meeting up with the 7th Army and the Vietnamese Army, the 1st Cavalry Division was the first to move out. They headed straight for Linchin in the northeast. Following that, the 5 outsiders also moved out. They had their eyes on Ximing Prefecture in the east. The last to move out was Lu Zhua's 1st Cavalry Division. They went to Yongji City in the west to cooperate with Division Commander Tianhu. They've finally moved. Nanning Prefecture, the central city of Guangxi. Guangdong King Zhu Huitu was currently presiding over the situation. Only half a day after the 5-star army moved out, a carrier pigeon brought the news. He said coldly, "Send people to investigate again." The scout left. Zhu Huitu started to read some information about the 5-star army. There were reports about the 1st Cavalry Division and the 1st Cavalry Division. However, because the outsiders had just been formed, they had only shown their might in Siam. There were not many records about them. Even so, the current information was enough for Zhu Huichun to analyze it properly. After an hour, Zhu Huitu shook his stiff neck and said, "The 1st Cavalry Division is not to be trifled with." This conclusion was not hard to come to. After all, this unit was too famous. Wherever they appeared, they would stir up trouble. Once Yang Chendong met with trouble, this unit would be mobilized and become the strongest killing weapon. When they took down the Phnom Penh dynasty, this unit was the main force. It only took them 31 days to take down a kingdom. This was almost unimaginable. However, they did it. With this, even Zhu Huitu did not dare to be careless. As the saying goes, pick the soft bone first. He did not want to meet such a strong opponent and dampen the morale of his soldiers. Just as he made the decision not to become enemies with the 1st Cavalry Division, a 2nd carrier pigeon arrived. The details of the 5-star army moving out over 100,000 people were revealed. Guangxi was the territory of the Little Nanming King. Many places here were filled with their spies. It was undoubtedly difficult to avoid the spies. Yang Chendong did not intend to hide the movement of the army. He came openly and wanted to see how the Little Nanming King would deal with it. Previously, Yao Yingjun, an intelligence agent in the Little Nanming King group, had already sent news that Zhu Huitu was sinister and cunning. He was the kind of person who was not easy to deal with. However, Yang Chendong still did not put him in his eyes. He believed that with the strength of the 1st Cavalry Division, even if they could not defeat the opponent, if they wanted to retreat, no one would be able to stop them. Yang Chendong was too confident. He did not expect Zhu Huitu to not become enemies with the 1st Cavalry Division at all. Instead, he targeted the 1st Cavalry Division. It was better to break one finger than to injure all 10. Zhu Huitu wanted to make a name for himself through the battle with the 5-star army. Therefore, he was already prepared for a tough battle. With the advantage of military strength, he believed that as long as the plan was good, he would be able to achieve his goal. He had never thought of completely wiping out the 5-star army. He did not have that kind of strength. As long as he could repel the attack of the 5-star army, it would be enough for him to strengthen his reputation. The 1st Cavalry Division became the stepping stone for him to become famous. Immediately send troops to Yongji City. At the same time, inform Wu Yingtu to do his best to wipe out this cavalry division. As long as he can accomplish this task, it will be a great merit. Also, don't forget to tell him how many people he loses in this battle. When he returns, he can choose double the number of soldiers. Zhu Huitu's face flashed with a sinister gaze. As for the news that a large number of 5-star army soldiers were heading towards Ximing residence, he directly ignored it. They had only lost a small city. Compared to the cavalry division that could destroy a 5-star corps, it was easy for them to deal with such a heavy burden. The news was sent through carrier pigeons. Half a day later, it reached Wu Yingtu. At this moment, he was drinking with the general of the Bangladesh army, Rajiv. When he saw this order, he could not help but laugh. He could choose any soldiers he wanted, and the compensation was 2-to-1. This was a good deal. In the worst-case scenario, he could lose 10,000 Miao people in exchange for 20,000 elite Ming soldiers. Since it was like this, what was there to be afraid of? He drank the wine in his bowl in one gulp and looked at Rajiv. Of course, he said to the interpreter beside him, "Tell him that we should get to work." Afterwards, the large net targeting the 1st Cavalry Division began to unfold. Meanwhile, Lu Zhua, who was completely unaware of all of this, was leading the 1st Cavalry Division to wander around Yongji City. His mission was to attack the small Baiming reinforcements that came out from here and do his best to ensure the safety of the 1st Cavalry Division's left wing. Lu Zhua, who never thought that anyone would make an enemy out of his cavalry and did not know that he had already been targeted, only had Yongji City in front of him in his eyes. He was completely unaware that small southern Ming soldiers were continuously gathering around him and surrounding him. 1 day passed, 2 days passed, and on the 4th day, he still did not see any reinforcements coming out from Yongji City. Even if Lu Zhua was a careless person, he still felt that something was not right. Logically speaking, Division Commander Tian who should have already started attacking the surrounding areas. Due to the limitations of the cavalry, the level of the siege was average. However, sweeping through the villages and important roads around the city should not be a problem. Why did Yongji City not have any intention of sending reinforcements? Reporting, Division Commander, the scouts have reported that small southern Ming soldiers have been discovered behind us. Reporting, Division Commander, the scouts have reported that an unknown number of enemies have been discovered on our right. Reporting, our left. The reports entered Lu Zhua's ears one after another. At this moment, his expression was constantly changing. He finally understood why there had been no movement for 4 days in a row. It seemed that someone had set their sights on him. However, this was a cavalry division, and they were also cavalry warriors who had experienced hundreds of battles on the grasslands. Did they really think that they could take them down in one go? Immediately send a report to the 6th young master and report the situation here. At this moment, Lu Zhua's eyes did not show any fear. On the contrary, there was a bit of excitement. For a long time, he had wanted to lead an army and fight the enemy alone to prove his ability. Chapter 1059. Now, the opportunity had finally appeared. Order the 1st Regiment to be in the north, the 2nd Regiment to be in the east, the 3rd Regiment to be in the west, and the 4th Regiment to be in the back. Form an effective defense mechanism and wait for my orders. Get ready to attack, Lu Zhua shouted excitedly. He couldn't wait to kill. To be honest, when he found out that the little Nanming army wanted to surround him, he was somewhat angry. They were clearly looking down on him. Since that was the case, he naturally wanted to show them how powerful he was and let them know that the 1st Cavalry Division was not so easy to bully. At the same time, the telegram was sent to Yang Chendong in the Langshan Plains shelter. At this moment, it wasn't just the 1st Cavalry Division that sent the telegram. The 1st Cavalry Division and the Alien Alliance Army also sent the telegram. The 100,000 troops of the Alien Alliance Army had already begun to attack the Siming residence. Everything was going very smoothly. They didn't encounter any enemy reinforcements. With 100,000 people attacking a city with only 20,000 soldiers, there were no variables. The only thing they lacked now was time. However, the contents of the telegram from the 1st Cavalry Division were a bit strange. According to Tian Hu, when they arrived outside Linshan, the Little Nanming army had already retreated into the city. Then, they swept through the periphery. Other than some civilians who stayed here, they didn't encounter any other army. It felt like they had punched cotton. It was a bit uncomfortable. Tian Hu felt that something was wrong, so he sent a telegram to ask what to do next. After all, it was a pity that a sharp weapon released couldn't kill the enemy. Yang Chendong was also puzzled by this telegram. His intuition told him that something was wrong. The Little Nanming army must be planning something, but he couldn't figure out what their goal was. It was also at this time that the telegram from the 1st Cavalry Division came. When they learned that there were enemies there and their numbers were unknown, Yang Chendong suddenly sobered up and said, "Not good, the enemy is going to attack the 1st Cavalry Division. Young master, let's go rescue them." Beta Persei had long been itching for a fight. When he heard that there was finally a battle to fight, he volunteered. "I'm afraid it's too late." Yang Chendong didn't immediately agree. Instead, he came to the sand table and looked at the distance between them before shaking his head. There were only 1,000 Black Knights by his side. The rest were the main forces of the 7th Army. However, they did not have the help of war horses, so they could not move too fast. If they ran on foot, the 1st Cavalry Division would have suffered heavy losses before they could reach the battlefield. Beta Persei's heart sank when he heard Yang Chendong say that it was too late. He then asked, "Young master, should we send Division Commander Tian Hu to rescue them?" Yang Chendong wanted to say that since the other party was targeting the 1st Cavalry Division, it was impossible for them not to send someone to watch the 1st Cavalry Division. Sending him to rescue them would be dangerous. However, when he thought about how Linshan was not too far away, a rescue plan quickly formed in his mind. Yes, immediately send a telegram to Tian Hu and ask him to send the main forces to support the 1st Cavalry Division. Tell him that if someone tries to stop them, don't be afraid. Young master, I will immediately lead the troops to support them. Also, send a telegram to Division Commander Lu Zhua and tell him not to be rash. Concentrate the troops and wait for reinforcements. Yang Chendong said to Wang Shan, who was following beside him. He then called for Beta Persei to gather the Black Knights and the 7th Army to quickly gather. The telegram was quickly sent out. Tian Hu, who received the order, did not dare to delay. He immediately ordered the 2nd Regiment Commander Lu Duo, the 3rd Regiment Commander Hu Bo, and the 4th Regiment Commander Bai Shuang to lead their troops to Yongji City. The 3 regiment commanders brought the 6,000 cavalry and turned their horses around, preparing to leave. At that moment, the gates of Linshan City opened and the soldiers of the South Ming Army poured out. Needless to say, they could tell that the 1st Cavalry Division wanted to leave, so they charged out and wanted to stop them. "Division Commander, what should we do?" The 2nd Regiment Commander Lu Duo saw that the enemy had actually taken the initiative to leave the city. He was hesitant as to whether or not he should carry out his previous orders. "Don't worry so much, just follow the orders." Tian Hu narrowed his eyes and looked at the South Ming army that had appeared, revealing traces of killing intent. From the reports, he knew that the enemy only had 20,000 soldiers. The 4,000 cavalry that he had left behind were enough to deal with them. Moreover, the 6th young master had already said that he would bring reinforcements. What was there to be afraid of? Knowing that their division commander had made up his mind, the 3 regiment commanders looked at each other and raised the horsewhips in their hands. They brought their cavalry and left the battlefield, heading towards Yongji City. Everyone listen to my orders. Check the bows and swords. Tian Hu licked his lips. Even though he only had 4,000 cavalry, he was still very confident. As long as the South Ming army dared to charge over, he wouldn't mind teaching them a lesson. Back to Lu Zhuo's troops. The 4 regiments under him had already prepared to defend all 4 sides and were even prepared to attack at any moment. Yang Qindong's telegram had arrived. After reading the contents, although he was still a bit angry and thought that the 6th young master didn't believe in the strength of the 1st Cavalry Division, he couldn't go against military orders. He still ordered the entire army to defend and not attack. Reality quickly told him that listening to Yang Qindong's orders was the right thing to do. This was because Lu Zhuo quickly realized that there were more and more enemies surrounding him. Among them, there were also cavalrymen and Miao soldiers with Miao swords in their hands. When the scouts continuously retreated and information entered his ears, Lu Zhuo's expression finally changed. The number of enemies surrounding him had reached 100,000 infantry and 15,000 cavalry. This number greatly exceeded his expectations. He could imagine what would have happened if he had taken the initiative to attack. Perhaps the entire 1st Cavalry Division would have been annihilated here. Taking a deep breath, Lu Zhuo calmed himself down. He shouted to the cavalry soldiers beside him, "Everyone, don't panic. The 6th young master already knows about the situation here. The 1st Cavalry Division is rushing over to provide reinforcements. As long as we can hold on for a while, we will be able to wait for reinforcements to arrive." When the name of the 6th young master was mentioned, it greatly boosted the morale of the entire division. In the eyes of the soldiers, Yang Qindong had already become an omnipotent existence. Since he already knew about the situation here, as long as they could hold on, they would definitely be able to find a chance to survive. Taking out their bows and arrows, and hanging their swords by the side of their horses, the 8,400 cavalry soldiers looked at the enemies coming from all directions with bright eyes. Everyone's eyes revealed the determination to fight to the end. Wu Yingtu and Rajiv, who surrounded them, had a slightly regretful expression on their faces. They were somewhat disappointed that the enemy did not take the initiative to attack. But what could they do? With their military strength that was more than 10 times that of the enemy, they were still confident that they could destroy the enemy. Fearing that undue delay would lead to more trouble, Wu Yingtu and Rajiv, who did not want to wait any longer, gave out orders at the same time. The army of more than 100,000 slowly advanced, constantly shrinking the encirclement. It seemed like they wanted to surround the 1st Cavalry Division and annihilate them here. In the face of absolute strength, any promises and tricks were futile. Neither side came up with such a plan. An hour later, when the distance between the two sides was less than 1 li, battle cries sounded from all directions. The infantry of the Southern Ming army took the initiative to attack. Take turns to fire arrows. Try to preserve your strength and kill as many enemies as possible. Lu Zhuo displayed the characteristics of an excellent general. In the face of a grim situation, not only was he not afraid, he was also very calm. Under his orders, wave after wave of arrows were shot out, landing in the midst of the charging enemy camp. Cries of pain and agony continuously sounded out. Less than 1 li away, the cavalry forcefully fired 5 waves of arrows. After killing about 1,000 enemies, the cavalry of the 1st Cavalry Division began to move. Their warhorses galloped and collided with the charging soldiers of the Southern Ming army. The smell of blood filled the air, giving off an unpleasant smell. This was destined to be a battle that could not be won. There were people everywhere, and under the impenetrable blockade, the cavalry's range of movement was constantly shrinking. Unable to use their strengths, the cavalry's advantage was greatly reduced, and the 1st Cavalry Division began to suffer casualties. Fortunately, the morale of the soldiers of the Southern Ming army wasn't that high. When they charged forward with their advantage in numbers and thought that they could drown the 1st Cavalry Division, they were met with a strong counterattack. Especially when the soldiers at the front were either killed by arrows or chopped into 2 by sharp sabers. When this terrifying scene appeared, the soldiers of the Southern Ming army retreated and their morale began to waver. Using this chance, the 1st Cavalry Division took a breather and once again shot out arrows, increasing their victory. Under Linshan City, 50,000 Southern Ming Army soldiers charged out from all directions. Contrary to his expectations, there were only 20,000 enemies. Unknowingly, 30,000 more had appeared. 4,000 against 50,000, a difference of more than 10 times, causing the pressure on the 1st Cavalry Division to increase. However, facing all of this, Division Commander Tian who was not moved. In his eyes, enemies were meant to be killed. There was no difference between 1 enemy and 10 enemies. The war horses galloped and did not retreat. Tian who was the tip of the arrow, leading dozens of cavalry to charge at the Southern Ming army. At the same time, there were hundreds of other arrow formations. As the two sides clashed, corpses were strewn all over. This was the first time that the Southern Ming army had seen the arrow formations. The moment they came into contact with them, they were stunned. When the formations broke through the momentum of the Southern Ming army's charge and disrupted their formation, the enemy had no choice but to switch from offense to defense. Even so, they still suffered heavy casualties. If it weren't for the fact that they had the advantage in numbers, they might have already collapsed. Cavalry still had a lot of advantages over infantry. For example, in terms of speed, strength, and mobility. In addition, every soldier of the 1st Cavalry Division had been carefully selected. They were all experienced veterans who had gone through countless bloody battles. When they cooperated with each other and attacked with unparalleled speed and decisiveness, even more enemy corpses were left on the battlefield. Chapter 1060. In front of Yongji City, the bloody battle continued. After losing the first battle, 15,000 Bengali cavalry joined in and greatly suppressed the 1st Cavalry Division's counterattack. Both sides were cavalry, and even though the 1st Cavalry Division's fighting strength was stronger, they still showed signs of fatigue in the face of more and more energetic enemy cavalry. The 1st Cavalry Division's casualties began to increase. At the start, there were only a few dozen casualties, but now there were hundreds. This number was still increasing. After 8 hours of bloody battle, the sky had completely darkened. Thanks to the weather, the Southern Ming army stopped attacking and only surrounded them. Using this opportunity, Lu Zhuo ordered the soldiers to rest and reorganize. Then, countless soldiers jumped down from their horses with tired faces. It was also at this time that Lu Zhuo, as the division commander, noticed that around 2,000 soldiers had died in battle and 500 were seriously injured. The other soldiers were also injured. After knowing that more than a quarter of the soldiers had died, Lu Zhuo's face became terrifyingly gloomy. He called over the telegraphist beside him and told him to report this situation to the 6th young master. At the same time, he added that he and the 1st Cavalry Division were prepared to fight to the last man. When Yang Chendong received this news, he was on the way to Linshan City with the Black Cavalry and the 7th Army. After reading the telegram, he put it aside. At this moment he didn't know what to say. All he could do was silently rush. At the same time, he had a clearer understanding of King Guangtong. He also admitted that compared to other great Ming generals, this person knew more about the art of war. He admitted that he had underestimated this King Guangtong. Yang Chendong also hoped that the reinforcements sent by Tian who would arrive quickly and help the 1st Cavalry Division. In reality, Lu Duo and the other division commanders didn't delay along the way. After receiving the order, they rushed over from Linshan City. Even when they ate on their horses. During this time, they met many enemy soldiers who tried to stop them, but they were all defeated by their unstoppable momentum. When the sky was about to brighten, they were finally less than 50 li away from Yongji City. When the sky slowly brightened, the Bengali cavalry once again attacked. Not only that, but there were also 10,000 Miao soldiers working together with them. The Miao soldiers were able to survive until now because of their hard work. Facing the encirclement of the Ming army at all times, their fighting strength gradually increased. Compared to normal Ming soldiers, their performance on the battlefield was better and more ferocious. 10,000 Miao soldiers and 10,000 Bengali cavalry surged forward, showing that the southern Ming army was ready for the final battle. Facing this, Lu Zhuo didn't have any intention of backing down. He personally led the cavalry forward. Although they didn't have the advantage in numbers, and their stamina wasn't as good as when they were at their peak after fighting for half a day, they had the confidence to survive. They had to persevere until the last moment when they couldn't hold on anymore. The battle continued, and lives could be lost at any time. The 1st Cavalry Division had more and more injured people, and the number of brothers who died also gradually increased. The team of 6,000 became 5,000, then 4,000. More than half of them had died, but there were still no reinforcements. Lu Zhuo didn't know how many enemies he had killed. His body was covered in blood. Some of it was his, but most of it was the enemy's. Another half an hour passed, and the number of casualties around him had exceeded 1,000. He knew that if this continued, the remaining 3,000 people would all be sacrificed here in less than an hour. Could it be that there was really no hope? Just as this thought appeared in Lu Zhuo's mind, a commotion came from the encirclement behind him. Then, a loud and familiar bugle sounded. This was the unique bugle call of the 5-star army when they were charging. When Lu Zhuo first heard it, he felt that this sound was so beautiful and pleasant to the ears. His entire body felt so comfortable. When he turned around, he saw the infantrymen of the Little South Ming army retreating to the sides like a tide. In the middle, a large number of cavalrymen were rushing in. It's the comrades of the 1st Cavalry Division. Our reinforcements are here. Retreat and quickly report back to the other side. Finally seeing hope, Lu Zhuo didn't know where he got the strength from. As he shouted loudly, his arms seemed to be filled with strength, allowing him to once again swing his sword to block the attack of the enemy cavalry in front of him. It was Lu Duo and the other 3 regiments of the 1st Cavalry Division's cavalry. They had rushed all the way here and finally arrived at the last moment. Then, like a ferocious tiger, they charged towards the encirclement of the southern Ming army. Under their valiance, no one was their match. Any soldier who had the courage to stand in front of Lu Duo and the others would quickly become a corpse lying on the cold ground. When more and more soldiers were killed on the ground, no one dared to take the brunt of the attack. A large path was opened, and the 1st Cavalry Division and the 1st Cavalry Division finally met up. "Commander Lu, leave this to us. You take the brothers and retreat." The moment Lu Duo arrived, he took over the front line of defense of the 1st Cavalry Division. He led the 2nd Regiment to block the attack. The 3rd Regiment Commander Hu Bo was in the middle, and the 4th Regiment Commander Bai Shuang was at the back. They protected Lu Zhuo and the 3,000 injured cavalry as they retreated. The moment Lu Duo arrived, he quickly taught the opposing Bengali cavalry how to behave. As for the Miao soldiers who were wielding Miao blades, the brothers of the 1st Cavalry Division were either wielding a blade in one hand and a shield in the other, or wielding a blade in both hands. Only then did they understand why the enemy was called the 1st Cavalry Division, and how wrong it was to think that the 1st Cavalry Division was already very powerful. If you compare yourself to others, you'll die. If you compare goods, you'll throw them away. When Lu Duo's 2nd Regiment appeared, although there were only 2,000 people, they gave off the feeling that they were an army with thousands of men and horses. The first to suffer heavy losses were the Bengali cavalry. Because they were cavalry, they were used to being high and mighty. Normally, they would look down on the infantrymen. In their eyes, they were the strongest. However, just a day ago, 1st Cavalry Division taught them what to do, let them know what kind of disastrous price they would pay if they underestimated their opponent. They taught them that even though they were both cavalry, the difference in strength was like heaven and earth. They originally thought that the cavalry of the 1st Cavalry Division was already very strong. After all, to be able to hold on for so long under the attack of so many infantrymen and twice the number of cavalry was already very difficult. Seeing that the 1st Cavalry Division was about to be finished, their morale was about to collapse. If that was the case, they would only need one more charge to completely wipe out the enemy. However, another cavalry appeared, and the enemy's 2,000 cavalry dared to charge head-on. Looking at the close to 10,000 Miao soldiers and the countless southern Ming soldiers around them, the Bengali cavalry laughed. They laughed. There were still people in this world who didn't know death. Did they really think that they were made of iron? A mere 2,000 people dared to attack an army of tens of thousands. Of course, they couldn't be spoiled. They immediately pulled out their horses and charged forward, holding their swords. They wanted to teach these new 5-star army cavalry how to write the word death. Then they indeed knew what the word death was. Unfortunately, they were the ones who died and not their opponents. Lu Duo and the others either had a sword and a shield, or 2 swords. They could both attack and defend. When they defended, they could defend themselves tightly. When they attacked, they could attack openly. Regardless of whether it was the speed, strength, or tricky angles of the swords, it was impossible for the enemy to catch up. Many cavalrymen were even knocked off their horses before they could see their opponents clearly. Under such a concentrated attack, once a cavalryman fell off his horse, the consequences would be unimaginable. Even if you weren't seriously injured, as long as you fell off your horse, there would be countless feet stepping on you. Even if you wanted to, you wouldn't be able to survive. With such great strength and speed, most of the Bengali cavalrymen were knocked off their horses in an instant. When this scene continued, the Bengali cavalrymen learned to be smart. They reined in their horses and intentionally retreated, leaving the battlefield to the other infantrymen. The second to be attacked were the Miao soldiers. They were at the front of the charge, and because of that, when the Bengali cavalrymen retreated, they became the vanguard of the charge. Fortunately, Lu Duo's 2nd Regiment started to slow down, as if to give them a chance to catch their breath. Then the 3rd Regiment came. Under the lead of their regiment commander, Hubo, they launched a new charge, and the force of the charge slammed into the Miao soldiers. Blood splattered everywhere, as blades flashed. Many of the Miao soldiers were sent flying by the force of the charge, while others were slashed in the head by the blades. In just a single exchange, hundreds of people had fallen. However, the charge was still ongoing, and there were still some cavalrymen from the 3rd Regiment that had not reached the front. Seeing the enemy's strength increasing, the Bengali cavalrymen retreating, and the surrounding Nanming soldiers retreating, the Miao soldiers could not take it anymore. Why should they be the ones to face the danger? They immediately began to retreat. This caused the Nanming soldiers, who seemed to have the upper hand, to be forced into a passive retreat. Don't charge anymore, everyone retreat, retreat. The 3rd Regiment Hubo had only killed 2 enemies, and the area in front of him was empty. He looked enviously at Lu Duo's 2nd Regiment, who was resting by the side. Lu Duo's 2nd Regiment was truly enjoying themselves. Regardless of whether his killing intent was satisfied or not, Hubo did not forget the main purpose of this mission. Since they had already met up with the 1st Cavalry Division, the next thing to do was to rescue them. This was not only the orders of their regiment commander, Tian Hu, but also the orders of the 6th Young Master. Chapter 1061. The 6th Young Master's orders were not to be disobeyed. Bai Shuang led the 4 regiments and retreated, with the 3,000 wounded soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division in the middle. Then, Lu Duo's 2nd Regiment and Hubo Er's 3rd Regiment brought up the rear. The group successfully charged out of the encirclement and moved towards Liangshan's shelter. Wu Yingtu and Ravji were only left with their backs. The world's 1st Cavalry Division continued to display their absolute strength and completed the mission of rescuing the 1st Cavalry Division. The remaining 2 regiments were led by Division Commander Tian Hu and engaged in a life-and-death battle with the 50,000 Southern Ming soldiers. 4,000 against 50,000, they naturally had a disadvantage in terms of numbers. But so what? This did not affect Tian Hu and the others in the slightest. Under his leadership, the formation at the tip of the arrow advanced, retreated, and advanced again as if it had entered a no-man's land. It went in and out 7 times. It was as valiant as Zhao Zilong on the yellow board slope. Teacher Tian, whose dual blades could be said to be used exquisitely by him. Wherever he appeared, a long hole would be cut open. No one could come out from his left or right, and no one was his match. Anyone who dared to block in front of him would either die or be injured. Tian, who led the 4,000 men of the 1st and 5th regiments to block the attacks of the 50,000 southern Ming soldiers. He demonstrated that the 1st Cavalry Division's reputation was earned through slashing and slashing. It was said that the strong were afraid of the unreasonable were afraid of the reckless, and the reckless were afraid of those who didn't care about their lives. Seeing that the 4,000 cavalrymen didn't care about their lives and continued to charge forward, the 50,000 soldiers of the southern Ming army were terrified. After leaving behind close to 5,000 corpses, they slowly retreated. Even when the sky was completely dark, they didn't dare to take a step forward. In the end, we don't have enough troops. Looking at Linshan City that was just inches away, Tianhu sighed. He only had 2 regiments and 4,000 men. It was extremely difficult to break through the layers of obstacles and enter the city. With a sigh, he could only wait. He would wait until dawn to find another way. Compared to Tianhu, the southern Ming soldiers were even more depressed. They had the advantage in numbers, and they were the ones on the attack. But why was it the other way around when it came to the battlefield? Instead, they had become the ones being beaten. If it wasn't for the fact that they had too many soldiers and the number of 5-star army's cavalry was too small, perhaps a single attack would have destroyed their fighting spirit and caused them to be completely defeated. A few young southern Ming generals gathered together and offered suggestions. However, even after daybreak, they still couldn't find a better solution. At this time, the scouts at the front reported that the 5-star army's reinforcements had appeared. They did not know how many soldiers there were, but there were both cavalry and infantry. They could not think of a better idea, and now that they heard that reinforcements were coming, the few generals immediately came to an agreement to retreat back to Linshan City. They would then report this matter to King Guangtong and listen to his orders for what to do next. The southern Ming army suddenly retreated back to the city at dawn. Following which, Yang Chendong, Shifeng, 1,000 black cavalry and the 7th Army rushed over and met up with Tianhu. "Are you okay?" "6th young master, we are fine. In the battle yesterday afternoon, we killed close to 5,000 men. 3 brothers died and 78 were injured." As soon as he saw Yang Chendong, Tianhu immediately became a lot more spirited. Especially when he saw that Lu Qi, who came with him, was wearing a black weapon, he began to chuckle. "Not bad." Listening to the battlefield report, Yang Chendong nodded in satisfaction. The world's #1 cavalry division was indeed the #1 division. Even with 4,000 against 50,000, they were able to make the enemy not dare to move recklessly. Just based on this momentum alone, they were invincible. Of course, Yang Chendong also saw the light in Tianhu's eyes. He smiled and patted his shoulder. "Give the 7th Army an hour to rest and then prepare to attack." Hearing that the 6th young master was going to attack Linshan City, Tianhu laughed out loud. With the 7th Army leading the way, it was time for the cavalry division to show off their heroism. An hour passed in the blink of an eye. Following which, the various troops started to prepare for the attack. The 2 100mm mortars that came with the army were pushed to the front lines. They were adjusting the markers and aiming at the south gate of Linshan City. However, the plan didn't change quickly. Suddenly, the city gate opened and a small group of southern Ming troops appeared. "6th young master, we're ready. Should we fire now?" It was as if he didn't see the troops coming over. The 7th Army's commander, Tiansu, held his breath and asked. "Wait a moment." Yang Chendong looked at the diplomatic group with a face full of curiosity. What was going on? They hadn't even started fighting yet and the other side was already backing down? Did they want to negotiate? The others were also shaken by the scene in front of them. What kind of situation was this? An army was pressing down on the border. Shouldn't it be the army that was sent? Why was it a diplomatic group? What was the enemy doing? Those who didn't understand turned their attention to Yang Chendong. They were used to listening to the 6th young master's orders. Especially when they didn't understand something, they had to listen to the 6th young master. This was because countless facts had proven that this person wouldn't make a wrong decision. However, this time, Yang Chendong was indeed confused by the situation in front of him. However, he didn't show any surprise or hesitation on the surface. Instead, he seemed to be sizing up the troops coming out of the city. In reality, he was observing and trying to figure out the other party's intentions. Without any orders, the cannons didn't fire and the troops smoothly arrived at the front lines. When the two sides were less than 300 meters apart, they stopped. Then, a middle-aged man wearing a long robe walked out of the diplomatic group. The moment he appeared, Beta Persei's eyes widened. "Young master, we seem to have seen this person before." Nonsense, of course they had seen him before. The person who came was Chen Tian, the most eloquent person in the Little South Ming dynasty. Yang Chendong had met him once before. That was when they were dealing with the heavenly resident stockades Miao Jinlong, and he played the role of a lobbyist. However, he didn't expect to appear again. Could it be that they were really here for peace talks? Yang Chendong couldn't understand. The current situation was clearly in the Little South Ming dynasty's favor. Moreover, the fate of the surrounded 1st Cavalry Division was still unknown. Even if they wanted peace talks, he should be the one to suggest it. The other party had actually appeared. What was the meaning of this? Chen Tian didn't let Yang Chendong wait for long. Soon, he led a group of people to Yang Chendong, who was in the middle of the battle formation. Then he cupped his fists and bowed. In a very familiar manner, he said, "Bugnam of Gojoseon, it's been a few years since we last met in Gaozhou. You're still as elegant as ever." Unable to understand what the other party was thinking, Yang Chendong maintained a polite smile. "Mr. Chen, you've come from afar. It must be a pleasure to meet you. Come please." He didn't show any doubt, as if he knew that Yang Chendong would come. Chen Tian's evaluation of Yang Chendong increased a little. He didn't show his emotions on his face. Under Yang Chendong's invitation, Chen Tian came to the main tent. Both parties sat down in the guest and host seats. Then, Beta Persei served the dishes and stood behind Yang Chendong. He glared fiercely at Chen Tian, as if he would draw his sword and kill him if Chen Tian dared to make any rash moves. Usually, people who were eloquent and good at talking were not timid. Otherwise, if they were so scared that they couldn't speak when they saw their opponent, it would be a big mistake. For this reason, no matter how Beta Persei looked at him, Chen Tian remained calm and composed. He slowly tasted his tea and didn't forget to nod gently, as if he was praising the taste of the tea. Yang Chendong also slowly tasted his tea. He was not in a hurry to ask the other party's purpose for coming. He believed that since Chen Tian had come, he would definitely have something to say. Yang Chendong just waited silently. Sure enough, after a quarter of an hour, Chen Tian, who had drunk 2 cups of tea in a row, put down his teacup and looked at Yang Chendong. He seemed to be interested and asked, "Bugnam of Gojoseon, what do you think of the current situation?" Was he showing off or testing him? Yang Chendong knew that King Guangtong's sudden choice to target the 1st Cavalry Division was indeed beyond everyone's expectations. It also broke the pre-war plan he had set before the war, so he had no choice but to take action personally. "What, after taking a small advantage, you want to show off in front of me?" Although he felt a bit ashamed, Yang Chendong said without changing his expression, "Very good. Don't you see that the 5-star army has already surrounded Linshan City? If this king wants to, we should be able to break through the city quickly and kill our way to Nanning Prefecture. Oh right, I heard that Zhu Huihua is there. Ha, just right, I can find him to drink some tea. It's a beautiful thing for 2 kings to meet." It seemed like he was talking about an extremely ordinary matter, but when Chen Tian heard these words, his expression couldn't help but turn ugly. First, the current situation was between Linshan City and Little Southern Ming Army. Whether it was in terms of territory or military strength, the 5-star army was at a disadvantage. It wasn't like what he said about breaking through the city. Second, regarding Yang Chendong's identity as Bugnam of Gojoseon, it was only a reward from the imperial court. Until now, neither Little Southern Ming Army nor Little Southern Ming Army had publicly acknowledged it. Thus, the so-called meeting between 2 kings was naturally impossible. Chen Tian chuckled as he thought about how thick-skinned and black-hearted Yang Chendong was. He didn't refute Yang Chendong directly because he wanted to wait for Yang Chendong to ask him why he was laughing. Then, he would remind Yang Chendong that this would play an important role in the upcoming negotiations. However, some things didn't necessarily develop according to plan. Just like now, there was an extra person outside the door. It was the telegrapher, Wang Shan. When he sent the 2 telegrams to Beta Persei and arrived in Yang Chendong's hands, he only took a cursory glance and raised his eyebrows. After a moment of silence, he whispered something in Beta Persei's ear. Then, Beta Persei nodded and left. Only Yang Chendong and Qin Tian were left in the main tent. At this moment, Yang Chendong didn't speak, nor did he ask him what he was laughing about. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.